The photograph was all 7-year-old Maya had left of her birth mother, a faded image of a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands that she kept hidden beneath her pillow. But when her wealthy adoptive father discovered it during one of his cold inspections of her room, he didn't just take it away, he burned it right in front of her, watching her tears fall as the flames consumed her last connection to love. Maya thought no one cared, that she was truly alone in the massive mansion where silence echoed through marble halls. She didn't know that Marcus, the quiet janitor's son who cleaned the estate after school, had been watching from the shadows. That night, as Maya sobbed herself to sleep, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He knew exactly where to find what she needed, and he was willing to risk everything to bring back what her father had destroyed. But how could a 12-year-old boy possibly recover something that had been burned to ash? Maya Chin Blackstone pressed her small fingers against the cool glass of her bedroom window, watching the sun paint golden streaks across the manicured gardens of the Blackstone estate. At 7 years old, she had learned to find beauty in small moments, the way morning light danced on the fountain, how the gardener's calloused hands tenderly pruned the roses, the soft flutter of curtains when evening breezes swept through. Her room, the photograph lay hidden beneath her silk pillowcase, a secret treasure she retrieved each night before sleep claimed her. The image showed a woman with warm brown eyes and gentle hands wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the kindness in her smile. Maya didn't remember much about her birth mother, Sarah Chen, but this photograph held everything: love, warmth, and the promise that someone had once cared for her with a mother's heart. The Blackstone mansion stretched across 3 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, its marble floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers, its walls lined with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to watch Maya's every move with disapproval. Richard Blackstone had adopted her when she was 4, 3 years ago, after her mother's tragic car accident left her orphaned and alone. He provided everything money could buy: private tutors, designer clothes, gourmet meals prepared by a French chef. But his love felt as cold and distant as the marble statues that decorated his halls. Every evening at precisely 8 o'clock, Richard would climb the curved staircase to Maya's room for what he called his inspection. He would examine her homework with a critical eye, check that her clothes were properly hung in the walk-in closet, and ensure that everything remained in its designated place. Order was paramount in the Blackstone household. Emotion was a weakness. To be controlled, Maya had learned to hide her treasures well. The photograph of her mother lived beneath her pillow, removed only in the darkest hours of night when loneliness pressed against her chest like a weight. She would trace her finger along her mother's face, whispering stories about what their life might have been like together, imagining warm hugs and bedtime stories, birthday cakes and scraped-knee kisses. Tonight felt different. The mansion's usual silence seemed heavier, more oppressive. Even the grandfather clock's steady ticking sounded ominous as it counted down the minutes until Richard's nightly visit. Maya carefully slipped the photograph from its hiding place, holding it close to her heart, as she had done countless times before. "I miss you, Mama," she whispered to the image. "I wish you could tell me what to do. I wish you could hold me." The sound of leather shoes on marble stairs made her freeze. Richard's footsteps were unmistakable, measured, purposeful, approaching with the inevitability of a storm. Maya quickly slid the photograph back beneath her pillow and arranged herself in bed, pulling the covers up to her chin and closing her eyes, pretending to sleep. But something was different tonight. The footsteps paused outside her door longer than usual. When Richard finally entered, his presence felt more intense, more scrutinizing. Maya kept her breathing steady, but her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. From the hallway came the soft sound of wheels on marble, Marcus Williams pushing his father's cleaning cart past Maya's room. At 12 years old, Marcus was tall for his age, with intelligent dark eyes and gentle hands that helped his father Jerome clean the mansion each night. Jerome had worked as the night janitor for 3 years, arriving after the Blackstone family retired to restore order to their privileged world. Marcus often glimpsed Maya during these evening rounds, a small, sad figure in flowing nightgowns, always alone, always watching the world from her bedroom window as if waiting for someone who would never come. Tonight, something made him pause outside her door, his hand frozen on the cart's handle as he sensed the tension radiating from within the room. Richard stood at the foot of Maya's bed, his silver hair perfectly styled even at this late hour, his expensive suit still crisp despite the long day. At 52, he commanded respect in boardrooms across the country, his real estate empire built on calculated decisions and strategic control. Children, he believed, were no different from business ventures. They required structure, discipline, and clear boundaries to reach their potential. Maya, his voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "I know you're awake." Her eyes fluttered open and she sat up slowly, pulling her knees to her chest. "Yes, Father. Your tutor mentioned some concerning behavior today. She said you seemed distracted, emotional. She found you crying during mathematics." Maya's cheeks burned with shame. She had been thinking about her mother during the lesson, wondering if Sarah had been good at numbers, if she would have helped Maya with the difficult problems, instead of simply expecting perfection. "I'm sorry, Father. I'll do better." "That's not sufficient, Maya." Richard's eyes, cold as winter steel, swept across her room with the precision of a security scan. "Emotional weakness is a choice. It's a luxury we cannot afford in this family. The Blackstone name represents excellence, control, and strength." His gaze lingered on her bed, noting how the pillow seemed slightly displaced, how Maya's small hands clutched the covers with unusual intensity. Years of business negotiations had taught him to read people's tells, to identify when someone was hiding something valuable. "Stand up," he commanded. Maya's heart sank. She rose on trembling legs, stepping away from the bed as Richard approached with the methodical precision of a detective examining evidence. His hands moved across her belongings, straightening books, adjusting the angle of her lamp, smoothing her bedspread with clinical efficiency. Then, his fingers found the pillow. In the hallway, Marcus pressed himself against the wall, instinctively, understanding that something terrible was about to unfold. He should continue with his cleaning duties, should push the cart forward, and mind his own business as his father had taught him. But Maya's frightened whimper froze him in place. Richard's hand slipped beneath the pillow and emerged with a photograph. The faded image of Sarah Chen seemed to glow in the lamplight, her kind eyes and gentle smile, a stark contrast to the cold fury that transformed Richard's features. "What is this?" His voice remained level, but Maya could see the storm building behind his controlled facade. It's my mother," Maya whispered, tears already beginning to blur her vision. "Please don't take it. It's all I have left of her. Your mother is deceased, Maya. I am your father now." This, he held the photograph between his fingers, like something contaminated. "This is a relic of the past that serves no purpose except to make you weak." "Please," Maya's voice broke as she reached toward the image. "I need it. I need to remember her." Richard pulled the photograph away from her grasping fingers. "Remembering the past prevents you from embracing the future." Sarah Chen was a nurse who worked double shifts and lived in a cramped apartment. She had nothing to offer you, no education, no opportunities, no connections that matter in this world. The cruelty of his words hit Maya like physical blows. Her mother had been everything, good and pure in her world, and Richard was reducing her to nothing more than a social status. "She loved me," Maya whispered, her small voice fierce with conviction. "Love doesn't pay for Harvard tuition. Love doesn't open doors to the right social circles. Love doesn't build empires." Richard's eyes glittered with cold certainty. "I have given you everything she never could. A name that commands respect, wealth that ensures your security, and opportunity she could never have imagined." From the hallway, Marcus watched in horror as Richard moved toward Maya's fireplace, where embers from the evening's fire still glowed orange in the grate. The man's intentions became devastatingly clear. "No!" Maya lunged forward, but Richard's free hand caught her shoulder, holding her back with effortless strength. "Watch carefully, Maya. This is what happens when we cling to weakness instead of embracing strength." Richard held the photograph above the dying flames. Sarah Chen's gentle face seemed to look directly at Maya one last time, as if saying goodbye, as if promising that love transcends even destruction. "Please don't burn it," Maya sobbed, her small body shaking with desperate grief. "I'll be good. I'll be perfect. I'll never cry again. Just please don't burn my mother." But Richard's hand opened and the photograph fluttered into the flames like a dying bird. Sarah's smile curled and blackened, her kind eyes disappearing into ash, her gentle hands turning to smoke that rose up the chimney and vanished into the night. Maya's scream shattered the mansion's silence, a sound so full of pure anguish that Marcus felt it pierce his own heart. She collapsed to her knees on the marble floor, reaching toward the fireplace as if she could somehow save what was already lost. "Now you understand," Richard said, his voice as steady as if he had just reviewed a quarterly report. "The past is gone. Only the future matters. Tomorrow, you will thank me for this lesson." He straightened his tie, smoothed his silver hair, and walked toward the door with the same measured steps that had brought him into the room. "Clean yourself up and get some sleep. Your tutor expects perfect attention tomorrow." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Maya alone with her grief and the fading scent of smoke that carried away the last physical piece of her mother's love. In the hallway, Marcus stood frozen, his young mind struggling to process the calculated cruelty he had witnessed. His father Jerome appeared at his elbow, having finished cleaning the library, and wondering why his son had stopped moving. "Marcus? What's wrong?" Marcus couldn't find words to describe what he had seen. The burning photograph, Maya's desperate. Please, Richard's cold indifference, it felt too monstrous to be real. Yet he had watched it unfold with the terrible clarity of nightmare. Through Maya's door came the sound of heartbroken sobbing, muffled by pillows, but carrying the weight of absolute despair. Marcus had never heard anyone cry like that, as if their very soul was being torn apart. "That little girl," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. He burned her mother's picture. He burned it right in front of her. Jerome's weathered face hardened with understanding. In his 50 years of life, he had seen cruelty in many forms, but the deliberate destruction of a child's last connection to love represented a special kind of evil. "We should go," Jerome said quietly, placing a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "This isn't our business." But as they pushed the cleaning cart away from Maya's door, both father and son knew that some things became your business whether you wanted them to or not. Some wrongs demanded action, regardless of the consequences. Maya's sobs followed them down the hallway, echoing through the mansion's marble corridors like the ghost of destroyed love. And Marcus knew that he would never forget the sound of a little girl's heart breaking into pieces. The seed of determination planted itself in his young heart that night, growing stronger with each of Maya's tears, taking root in the soil of injustice and watered by the memory of a gentle woman's photograph. Curling into ash, Richard Blackstone had destroyed something precious, believing that money and control could replace love and memory. But he had made one crucial miscalculation. He had underestimated the power of a 12-year-old boy, who understood that some things in life were worth any risk to protect. Marcus Williams was about to prove that heroism came in all sizes and that sometimes the most powerful person in a mansion was the quiet kid who cleaned its floors and remembered its secrets. The photograph was gone, burned to ash and blown away on the night wind. But love, Marcus was beginning to understand, was not so easily destroyed. Sometimes it just needed someone brave enough to fight for its return. 3 blocks away from the Blackstone estate, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Garcia's bakery, Marcus Williams sat at a scratched wooden table, doing homework by lamplight. The warm scent of tomorrow's bread drifted up through the floorboards mixing with the aroma of his father's coffee and the distant sound of late-night traffic on Maple Street. Jerome Williams moved quietly around their small kitchen, packing his lunch for another night of cleaning the mansion that seemed to exist in a different universe from their humble home. At 50, Jerome's hands showed the wear of honest labor, calloused from years of mopping floors, scrubbing toilets, and polishing surfaces for people who rarely acknowledged his existence. But his eyes held the dignity of a man who took pride in his work, who understood that every job done well was a small victory against the world's tendency toward chaos. "You're quiet tonight," Jerome observed, glancing at his son's untouched math worksheet. "Usually have that homework finished by now." Marcus looked up from the page where numbers swam meaninglessly before his eyes. How could he focus on multiplication tables when Maya's screams still echoed in his memory? How could he pretend to care about fractions when he had watched a grown man destroy a little girl's most precious possession? "Dad," Marcus said slowly, "what makes someone mean? Like, really mean?" Jerome paused in his sandwich making, recognizing the weight behind his son's question. In their 3 years of working at the Blackstone estate, he had noticed things, the way Maya never seemed to smile, how she watched the world from her window like a prisoner, the careful distance Richard maintained from his adopted daughter, even during the rare moments when they occupied the same room. "Well," Jerome settled into the chair across from Marcus, "I think some people get mean when they're scared, when they think the only way to stay strong is to make everyone else weak. What if someone was mean to a little kid? Like, really mean?" Jerome's weathered face grew serious. "What kind of mean are we talking about, son?" Marcus hesitated, torn between loyalty to his father's job and the image of Maya's devastated face. If someone hurt a kid's feelings on purpose, if they took away something that made the kid happy and destroyed it, that's not mean, Marcus. That's cruel. There's a difference. Jerome's voice carried the wisdom of someone who had seen both ends of human nature. Mean is when someone's having a bad day and takes it out on others. Cruel is when someone chooses to cause pain because they can. What should you do if you see someone being cruel? Jerome was quiet for a long moment, understanding that his answer would shape his son's moral compass for years to come. "The right thing," he finally said, "even when it's scary, even when it might cost you something, because staying silent when someone's being hurt makes you part of the cruelty." Marcus nodded, feeling the rightness of his father's words settle into his bones like truth finding its home. "Dad, tell me about that little girl at the mansion, Maya." Jerome's expression softened with compassion that Marcus rarely saw his father express about their employers. "She's a sad little thing. Lost her mama when she was young, got adopted by Mr. Blackstone when she was 4. He provides for her well enough. Nice clothes, good education, all the material things a child could need. But that little girl looks like she's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Never seen her laugh, barely seen her smile. She watches everything from her window like she's looking for something that's never going to come." Marcus remembered Maya's desperate pleas as Richard held the photograph above the flames. "Dad, what if I told you that Mr. Blackstone burned a picture of Maya's mother tonight, right in front of her?" Jerome's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. "What did you say?" "I saw it happen. She had this photograph hidden under her pillow, the only thing she had left of her birth mother. He found it during one of his room inspections and burned it in her fireplace while she begged him not to." The mug hit the table with a sharp crack, coffee sloshing across the scarred wood. Jerome's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, horror, and finally a cold anger that Marcus had rarely seen in his gentle father. "He burned her mother's picture," Jerome repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, "while she watched. She screamed, 'Dad!' I've never heard anyone make a sound like that, like something inside her was dying." Jerome stood abruptly, pacing to the small window that overlooked the bakery's loading dock. His reflection stared back from the glass, a man caught between moral obligation and economic necessity. The Blackstone job paid better than anything else he could find in their small Connecticut town. It provided health insurance, steady hours, and enough income to keep Marcus in decent clothes and school supplies, but some things mattered more than money. That poor baby, Jerome whispered, his voice thick with emotion. To lose her mama so young, and then to have the last piece of her. Memory destroyed like that? Marcus joined his father at the window. What can we do? I keep thinking about her crying, about how alone she looked. I don't know, son, but we can't just pretend we didn't see it. They stood in silence, father and son united in their shared sense of injustice. Outside, the night shift workers were heading home from the textile mill, their tired faces illuminated by streetlights as they walked past the bakery. These were Jerome's people, working folks who understood that dignity came from how you treated others, not from how much money you had in the bank. Dad, Marcus said quietly, what if the picture wasn't really gone? What if there was another copy somewhere? Jerome turned to look at his son, seeing something new in the boy's intelligent eyes, a determination that reminded him of Marcus's mother. God rest her soul. Sarah Williams had been a fighter too, someone who believed that love was worth any sacrifice. What are you thinking, Marcus? When people get adopted, don't they keep records, pictures, and papers and stuff like that? Jerome's heart swelled with pride at his son's quick thinking. They do. Social services, adoption agencies, they keep files on families, especially when there's been a tragedy. So Maya's mother's picture might still exist somewhere? It's possible. Jerome felt a dangerous hope beginning to bloom in his chest. But son, even if that's true, how would we get access to those records? They don't just hand out personal information to janitors and their kids. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his 12-year-old mind working through possibilities with the focused intensity he usually reserved for video games and science projects. What if we didn't tell them we were janitors? What if we said we were friends of the family? That would be lying, Marcus. Would it be wrong to lie if it helped Maya get her mother's picture back? Jerome struggled with the ethical complexity of his son's question. He had raised Marcus to value honesty above all else, to understand that integrity was the one thing poverty couldn't take away from them. But he had also raised him to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Sometimes, Jerome said carefully, the world puts you in situations where all your choices are complicated, where doing the right thing might require you to do something that feels wrong. Like Robin Hood? Despite everything, Jerome smiled. Yeah, son, like Robin Hood. Marcus grinned, and for the first time since witnessing Maya's trauma, he felt a spark of hope. So we're going to help her? We're going to try. But Marcus, you need to understand, this could cost us everything. Our jobs, our apartment, our security. Mr. Blackstone is a powerful man with expensive lawyers. If he finds out what we're planning, he already took everything from Maya, Marcus said with quiet conviction. At least we'd be losing our stuff to help someone, instead of just standing by while she suffers. Jerome looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw not just the boy he had raised, but the man Marcus was becoming. Compassionate, brave, willing to risk his own comfort for someone else's happiness. It was exactly the kind of person Jerome had hoped to raise, even if it meant sleepless nights worrying about the consequences. All right, Jerome said, his voice firm with decision. We'll help her, but we do this smart and we do this careful. One mistake and we're not just out of a job, we're out of town. Marcus nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of what they were undertaking. Where do we start? Tomorrow's Saturday. We'll take a trip downtown to the Adoption Services office, see what we can learn about Maya's case and whether there might be another copy of that photograph. As they began planning their mission of mercy, neither father nor son noticed the black sedan that had been parked across from the bakery for the past hour, or the private investigator inside taking notes on their conversation through high-powered listening equipment. Richard Blackstone had not built his empire by leaving loose ends untied. He knew that witnesses to weakness could become threats to power, and he had learned long ago that prevention was cheaper than damage control. But he had also underestimated the depth of love that existed in a modest apartment above a bakery, where a father and son were willing to risk everything for a little girl they barely knew, simply because it was the right thing to do. The battle lines were being drawn, and Maya's champions were preparing for war. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, with October clouds hanging low over downtown Hartford like a blanket of uncertainty. Jerome had called in sick to his weekend maintenance job, claiming a stomach bug that would keep him home for the day. It wasn't entirely a lie. His stomach had been churning with nervous energy since their decision to help Maya. Marcus wore his best clothes, a button-down shirt that was only slightly too small, and dress. Pants that Jerome had bought from the thrift store last spring. They had practiced their story during the bus ride downtown. Jerome was Maya's uncle, visiting from out of state, hoping to provide his niece with some connection to her late mother's memory. The Sunrise Adoption Services building stood on Elm Street like a beacon of hope among the government offices and legal firms that dominated Hartford's downtown core. Its brick facade was painted cheerful yellow with flower boxes beneath the windows and a welcoming sign that promised helping families find each other. Inside, the waiting room felt warm and inviting, with soft couches arranged around low tables covered in children's books and family magazines. Framed photographs lined the walls, happy families of all configurations, children with their adoptive parents, teenagers graduating from high school with proud guardians cheering from the audience. Marcus studied these images while his father approached the reception desk, wondering if Maya would ever have pictures like these, moments of genuine joy and celebration instead of cold obligation and calculated control. "Good morning," Jerome said to the receptionist, a middle-aged woman, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her nameplate read Mrs. Rodriguez, and she looked up from her computer with the patient smile of someone who had spent years helping families navigate complex emotional terrain. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" Jerome took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their deception, but remembering Maya's desperate screams. "My name is Jerome Williams, and this is my son, Marcus. We're here about my niece, Maya Chen Blackstone. She was adopted through your agency about 3 years ago after her mother, Sarah Chen, passed away." Mrs. Rodriguez's expression immediately softened with recognition and sympathy. "Oh yes, Maya, I remember her case well. Such a sweet little girl, and such a tragic situation with her mother's accident." She paused, studying Jerome's face with the practiced eye of someone trained to read people's motivations. "I'm sorry, but I don't recall any relatives being involved in Maya's adoption process. Mr. Blackstone was quite specific that there was no extended family available." Marcus felt his father tense beside him, but Jerome's voice remained steady. "I've been overseas with the military for the past few years. Just returned stateside and learned about Sarah's death and Maya's adoption. I was hoping to establish some connection with her, help her understand her mother's side of the family." It wasn't entirely false. Jerome had served briefly in the National Guard during Marcus's early childhood, though he had never been deployed overseas. The lie sat heavily on his conscience, but Maya's tear-streaked face kept appearing in his memory, reminding him why truth sometimes had to bend in service of love. Mrs. Rodriguez's expression remained professionally cautious. "I understand your desire to connect with Maya, Mr. Williams, but our policies are very strict about confidentiality. I would need proper identification, proof of your relationship to the birth mother, and most importantly, permission from Maya's legal guardian." "The thing is," Jerome said, leaning forward slightly, "I don't think Mr. Blackstone would be very receptive to Maya having contact with her mother's family. He seems to prefer that she focus on her future rather than her past." Something flickered in Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes, a flash of understanding that suggested she had encountered this situation before. Mr. Blackstone was very clear about his expectations during the adoption process. He wanted a clean break from Maya's previous life. Marcus spoke up for the first time, his young voice carrying a sincerity that no adult could fake. "Ma'am, Maya doesn't even have a picture of her mother anymore. She needs to know that her mom loved her, that she came from somewhere good." The words hung in the air like a confession, and Mrs. Rodriguez studied the boy's face with growing concern. "What do you mean she doesn't have a picture?" Jerome and Marcus exchanged glances, realizing they had revealed more than intended. But Marcus pressed forward, driven by the memory of Maya's anguish. Her dad, her adoptive father, he found the picture she kept hidden and he burned it right in front of her. She begged him not to, but he said it made her weak. Mrs. Rodriguez's professional composure cracked, revealing the mother and grandmother beneath the bureaucratic exterior. "He burned her mother's photograph while she watched?" she screamed, Marcus whispered. "I've never heard anyone sound so broken." The social worker was quiet for a long moment, her hands clasped tightly on her desk as she processed this information. In 25 years of adoption work, she had seen many approaches to helping children integrate into new families. Some parents embraced their children's histories, creating memory books and maintaining connections to birth families when appropriate. Others preferred to start fresh, believing that focusing on the future was healthier than dwelling on loss. But destroying a child's last connection to a deceased parent crossed a line that no professional training could excuse. "How do you know about this?" she asked quietly. Jerome made a decision that would change everything. "Because I work as a janitor at the Blackstone estate. My son helps me sometimes. We witnessed what happened." The truth settled between them like a bridge finally built across a chasm of deception. Mrs. Rodriguez looked from father to son, seeing not con artists or troublemakers, but two people who had risked their livelihood to advocate for a child who had no other voice. "You could lose your job for being here," she said. "We probably will," Jerome admitted. "But that little girl needs someone to fight for her. If we don't, who will?" Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for several minutes, staring at Maya's file on her computer screen. The photograph stared back at her, Sarah Chen's gentle face, so full of love and hope for her daughter's future. She remembered the day Sarah had filled out the paperwork for Maya's adoption, making Mrs. Rodriguez promise that whoever took her daughter would understand how much she was loved. "I could lose my job for what I'm about to do," Mrs. Rodriguez said finally. Marcus felt his heart jump with sudden hope. "Does that mean?" "It means that sometimes the rules exist to protect children, and sometimes they get in the way of protecting children." She turned her computer screen so they couldn't see it, but her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "I'm going to step away from my desk for 5 minutes to get some coffee. While I'm gone, please don't look at anything on my desk or touch my computer." She stood and walked toward the break room, leaving Jerome and Marcus alone with Maya's file. Displayed on the screen, the message was clear. They had 5 minutes to do what they needed to do. Marcus quickly moved behind the desk while his father kept watch at the door. The adoption file contained everything: Sarah's medical records, employment history, character references, and most importantly, a section labeled Family Photographs. There, in digital format, were 3 pictures of Sarah Chen. One was a professional headshot from her nursing school graduation, showing her proud smile and gentle eyes. Another was a candid shot of her holding baby Maya in the hospital, both mother and daughter, glowing with love and new life. The third was the same photograph that Richard had burned. Sarah in her simple blue dress, hands folded in her lap, looking directly at the camera with the serene confidence of a woman who knew she was deeply loved. "Can you print them?" Jerome whispered urgently. Marcus clicked on the print function, sending all 3 photographs to the office printer. The machine whirred to life, producing high-quality copies of the images that would restore Maya's connection to her mother's love. Mrs. Rodriguez returned just as Marcus stepped away from the computer, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing an expression of carefully cultivated ignorance. "I hope you found what you were looking for," she said, not looking at the fresh papers in the printer tray. "We did," Jerome said quietly. "Thank you. There's something else you should know," Mrs. Rodriguez continued, settling back into her chair. "Sarah Chen wrote letters to Maya, several of them, to be opened on specific birthdays and milestones. They're part of the adoption file intended to help Maya understand her mother's love as she grows up." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. Mr. Blackstone never gave them to her. Adoptive parents aren't required to share those materials immediately. Some wait until the child is older, better able to process the emotions involved. Mrs. Rodriguez's tone suggested she didn't approve of this approach in Maya's case. "Could we?" Jerome began. Mrs. Rodriguez's coffee cup paused at her lips. "I'm going to take another short break. 5 more minutes for coffee. Sometimes I'm very slow about my coffee breaks on Saturday mornings." She left again, and this time, Marcus printed copies of Sarah's letters, pages of handwritten love and wisdom meant to guide Maya through childhood and beyond. Letters for her 8th birthday, her 10th, her 16th. Letters about becoming a teenager, about boys and friendship, and following her dreams. Letters full of a mother's hopes and fears and unconditional love. When Mrs. Rodriguez returned, Jerome and Marcus were standing by the door, ready to leave with their precious cargo hidden in Marcus's backpack. "Thank you," Jerome said simply. "You've given a little girl her mother back." "No," Mrs. Rodriguez replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You did that. I just made some very convenient mistakes with my computer security." As they walked toward the door, she called after them. "Mr. Williams, if Mr. Blackstone ever asks how certain materials came to be in Maya's possession, you might suggest that adoption agencies sometimes conduct routine follow-ups on their cases. Sometimes we discover that important materials were inadvertently withheld from families. The message was clear. If their actions were discovered, Mrs. Rodriguez would provide cover for Maya's sake, even at the risk of her own career. Outside, the gray morning had given way to pale sunshine, as if the world itself was celebrating their small victory. Marcus clutched his backpack protectively, acutely aware that he was carrying more than photographs and letters. He was carrying the restoration of a little girl's faith in love. "What now?" he asked his father as they waited for the bus back. "Home. Now we figure out how to get these to Maya without getting caught," Jerome said. "And son, what we did today, I'm proud of you. Your mother would have been proud too." Marcus smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the emerging sunshine. They had taken the first step in a journey that would either restore a child's broken heart or cost them everything they had. But as they boarded the bus home, carrying Sarah Chen's love in a 12-year-old's backpack, both father and son knew they had made the only choice their consciences would allow. Maya's mother was coming home. The Blackstone mansion felt different when you moved through it with purpose instead of duty. Marcus had cleaned these halls dozens of times, but tonight, as he followed his father through the service entrance, with Sarah Chen's photographs hidden in his jacket pocket, every shadow seemed alive with possibility and danger. It was Sunday evening, and Richard Blackstone was attending a charity gala downtown, one of those elaborate affairs where wealthy people paid thousands of dollars for a mediocre dinner and the opportunity to be photographed looking philanthropic. According to the household schedule Jerome had memorized, Richard wouldn't return until well past midnight, giving them a narrow window to complete their mission. Maya had barely left her room since Friday night's trauma. The household staff whispered about her refusal to eat, her silence during lessons, the way she stared out her window for hours without moving. Even her private tutor had expressed concern about the child's sudden withdrawal from the world. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders as they climbed the servants' staircase toward the family quarters. 3 floors below, in the mansion's basement, the industrial washing machines hummed their familiar rhythm, providing cover for their footsteps. Everything had to appear normal, just another evening of routine maintenance in a house built on the illusion of perfect order. "Remember," Jerome whispered as they reached the second-floor landing, "we stick to our usual cleaning pattern. Start with the library, move through the guest rooms, then finish with the family wing. If anyone asks why we're here early, we tell them Mr. Blackstone requested extra cleaning before his Monday morning meetings." Marcus nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs with nervous energy. The photographs felt like they were burning a hole through his jacket, demanding to be reunited with the little girl who needed them so desperately. They had spent the entire day planning every detail of the operation. Jerome had studied the mansion's security system during his 3 years of employment, noting the locations of cameras and motion sensors. Most of the surveillance focused on the ground floor, protecting Richard's valuable art collection and business documents, while the upper floors relied primarily on the assumption that no one would dare violate the family's private spaces. The library came first, its mahogany shelves stretching from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that probably cost more than Marcus's family spent on groceries in a year. He dusted mechanically while his mind raced through the upcoming challenges. How would Maya react to seeing her mother's face again? Would she understand that someone cared enough to risk everything for her happiness? "She's awake," Jerome murmured, noting the thin line of light beneath Maya's bedroom door as they approached the family wing. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and terror. An awake Maya meant they could gauge her reaction, ensure she understood the significance of what they were returning to her. But it also meant greater risk of discovery if she reacted too emotionally to their presence. They paused outside her door, listening to the soft sounds within, pages turning, the creak of bed springs as she shifted position, a barely audible sniffle that suggested she had been crying again. Jerome's weathered face hardened with renewed determination. 3 days of watching this child suffer had convinced him that some risks were worth taking, regardless of the consequences. "You sure about this, son?" Jerome asked one final time. Marcus thought about Maya's desperate screams as Richard destroyed her photograph, about the way she had collapsed to her knees, reaching for ashes that could never be reassembled. He thought about Sarah's gentle face in the pictures they had printed, about the letters full of maternal love that had never reached their intended recipient. "I'm sure, Dad." Jerome knocked softly on Maya's door, 3 gentle taps that could easily be dismissed as the house settling if anyone happened to be listening. The sounds within the room stopped abruptly, followed by small footsteps approaching the door. "Who is it?" Maya's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from days of crying. "It's Marcus." "Maya, the janitor's son. I have something for you." Silence, stretched between them, pregnant with possibility and fear. Finally, the door opened just a crack, revealing one brown eye peering through the gap with cautious curiosity. "What kind of something?" she asked. Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew one of the photographs, Sarah's professional nursing school portrait, where her proud smile radiated the kind of warmth that no amount of money could purchase. He held it at the edge of the ducted crack, watching Maya's eye widen with shock and disbelief. That's impossible," she breathed. "He burned it. I watched him burn it." "He burned one picture," Marcus said gently. "But your mother's love was too big for just one photograph." The door swung open fully, revealing Maya in her white cotton nightgown, her dark hair tangled from restless sleep, her small face marked by the geography of recent tears. She reached toward the photograph with trembling fingers, afraid to touch it, as if it might dissolve like a mirage. "How?" she whispered. "Your mother wanted you to have these," Marcus said, producing the other photographs and Sarah's letters. "She left them at the adoption agency, hoping that someday you would know how much she loved you." Maya's legs gave out, and she sank to the marble floor of her room, clutching the images against her chest, as if they were life preservers in an ocean of grief. Jerome kept watch in the hallway, while Marcus knelt beside her, understanding that he was witnessing something sacred, the reunion of a daughter with her mother's memory. "She's so beautiful," Maya sobbed, studying Sarah's face with hungry eyes. "I was starting to forget what she looked like. I was so scared I would forget her completely." "Now you don't have to," Marcus said softly. "And there's more." He handed her the letters, watching her face transform as she recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelopes. Each letter was marked with an age. For Maya on her 8th birthday, for Maya when she turns 13, for Maya when she graduates. "High school," she wrote to me. Maya's voice broke with wonder. "She wrote to the woman you're going to become," Marcus explained. "She wanted to be part of your whole life, even though she couldn't be there in person." Maya opened the letter marked for her 8th birthday, her lips moving silently as she read her mother's words. "My dearest Maya, if you're reading this, it means you've grown into the beautiful 8-year-old I always dreamed you would become. I hope you know how proud I am of you, how much joy you brought to my life during our precious time together. You have your grandmother's stubborn streak and your grandfather's gentle heart, and I know these gifts will carry you through whatever challenges life brings." Tears streamed down Maya's face, but for the first time in days, they were tears of healing rather than despair. She looked up at Marcus with an expression of gratitude so pure and powerful that he felt his own eyes burning with emotion. "Why did you do this for me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Marcus thought about how to explain what he barely understood himself, the way injustice felt like a physical pain in his chest, the way a stranger's suffering could become your own responsibility, the way love demanded action even when action meant sacrifice. "Because nobody should have to be alone," he said simply. "And because your mother's love deserves to live, even if she can't. Will you help me hide them?" Maya asked, glancing nervously toward her door. "If he finds them again, we'll help you," Jerome said, entering the room and surveying their options. "But we need to be smart about this." Together, they created hiding places throughout Maya's room, photographs tucked inside bookbindings, letters sewn into the lining of her winter coat, copies hidden beneath loose floorboards they discovered behind her dresser. They distributed Sarah's memory across dozens of locations, ensuring that no single search could destroy everything. "Even if he finds some of them," Marcus explained, "he'll never find them all." As they worked, Maya shared stories about her mother that she had never been allowed to tell anyone. How Sarah sang lullabies in Mandarin, mixing her Chinese heritage with American melodies. How she made pancakes shaped like animals on Sunday mornings. How she always kissed Maya's forehead 3 times before bed, once for sweet dreams, once for tomorrow's adventures, and once for all the love that would keep them connected, no matter what happened. "She sounds like she was an amazing mother," Jerome said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was perfect," Maya whispered, "and now I can remember her being perfect." They finished their work as the grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 11 o'clock. Richard would return within the hour, making it crucial that they complete their cleaning duties and return to their normal routine before his arrival. "Marcus," Maya said as they prepared to leave, "what if he finds out what you did? What if you get in trouble?" Marcus knelt to her eye level, seeing in her face the echo of her mother's gentle strength. "Some things are worth getting in trouble for, Maya. Making sure you know you're loved is definitely one of them. Will I see you again?" "Every time we clean the house," Marcus promised. "And if you ever need anything, if you're ever scared or sad, you just let me know. You're not alone anymore." Maya hugged him then, a fierce, desperate embrace that conveyed more gratitude than words could express. Over her shoulder, Marcus saw Jerome wiping tears from his weathered cheeks, understanding that they had just participated in something larger than themselves. As they left Maya's room and returned to their cleaning duties, the mansion felt different around them. The marble halls that had once echoed with coldness now seemed to hum with secret warmth. Love had been restored to a place that had forgotten its value, and that love was already beginning to work its transformative magic. Maya spent the rest of the night reading her mother's letters, learning about the woman who had given her life and the dreams that woman had held for her daughter's future. For the first time since the photograph burning, she smiled, a real smile that started in her heart and bloomed across her face like sunrise after the longest night. 3 stories below, in the mansion's driveway, Richard Blackstone's limousine pulled through the iron gates, carrying a man who believed he had successfully erased his daughter's past. He had no idea that love was already growing in the spaces where he thought he had planted only forgetting, and that the quiet boy who cleaned his floors had just become the most dangerous person in his carefully controlled world. The war for Maya's heart had begun, and her mother's memory had returned to fight. The next morning brought the kind of crisp October weather that made Connecticut look like a postcard. Golden leaves dancing on cool breezes, the scent of wood smoke drifting from chimneys, and sunlight that seemed to promise new beginnings. But inside the Blackstone mansion, storm clouds were gathering with the intensity of a hurricane about to make landfall. Richard Blackstone sat in his mahogany-paneled study, reviewing quarterly reports from his real estate empire with the focused precision that had made him one of Connecticut's wealthiest men. Numbers flowed across his computer screen in neat columns: profits from luxury developments, returns on commercial investments, projections for the next fiscal year that promised continued growth in his already substantial fortune. But this morning, the numbers couldn't hold his attention. Something felt different in his house, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that his business-honed instincts recognized as potential threat. 20 years of high-stakes negotiations had taught him to trust these feelings, to investigate anomalies before they became problems. Maya had come down to breakfast with something he hadn't seen in her face for months. Hope, not the desperate hope of a child grasping for affection, but the quiet confidence of someone who knew they were loved. She had eaten her entire meal without prompting, answered her tutor's questions with renewed focus, and even hummed softly while completing her piano practice. To most people, this would have been cause for celebration, but Richard understood. That hope in a child meant secrets, and secrets meant loss of control. He had spent 3 years carefully constructing Maya's world to revolve entirely around his approval and disapproval. Her sudden independence suggested that someone, or something, had provided her with an alternative source of emotional security. The intercom on his desk buzzed with the announcement of his 10 o'clock appointment. Detective Frank Morrison had worked private security for wealthy clients throughout Connecticut for over 15 years, specializing in discreet investigations that never appeared in public records. Richard had used Morrison's services before, conducting background checks on potential business partners, investigating competitors' personal lives for leverage, ensuring that his own secrets remained buried beneath layers of legal protection. "Mr. Blackstone," Morrison said as he entered the study, carrying a manila folder thick with photographs and documents. "I have the surveillance report you requested." Morrison was a thin man with graying hair and the kind of forgettable face that made him perfect for covert observation. He dressed like a middle manager and drove cars that blended into traffic, becoming invisible through sheer ordinariness. "What did you discover about my household staff?" Richard asked, gesturing for Morrison to take a seat across from his massive desk. "Interesting developments," Morrison said, opening his folder with practiced efficiency. "Jerome Williams, your night janitor, made an unscheduled trip downtown on Saturday morning. He and his son visited the Sunrise Adoption Services office and spent approximately 45 minutes inside the building." Richard's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Did you determine the purpose of their visit?" "Through telephoto surveillance, I observed them speaking with Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, a seniors caseworker. They appeared to be reviewing documents and using the office printer. Based on their body language and the duration of their stay, this wasn't a casual inquiry." Morrison slid a series of photographs across the desk, long-range shots of Jerome and Marcus entering the adoption agency, close-ups of their faces during conversations with Mrs. Rodriguez, images of Marcus carrying what appeared to be a backpack full of papers as they left the building. "The timing is significant," Morrison continued. "This visit occurred exactly 1 day after you reported the incident with your daughter's photograph. Either this was an extraordinary coincidence, or Williams witnessed the event and decided to take action." Richard studied the photographs with the cold calculation he applied to hostile business takeovers. Jerome Williams looked different in these images, not like the deferential janitor who cleaned his floors, but like a man on a mission. The boy appeared nervous but determined, clutching his backpack like it contained precious cargo. "What kind of documents could they have obtained from the adoption agency?" Richard asked. "Birth family photographs, medical records, correspondence from the biological parents, anything that was part of the original adoption file. Agencies typically maintain comprehensive records, including materials that might not have been immediately provided to adoptive families. The implications hit Richard like a financial crisis spreading through his portfolio. If Maya had gained access to additional photographs or letters from her birth mother, everything he had worked to accomplish since the adoption would be undermined. The careful balance of dependency and gratitude he had cultivated would crumble, replaced by connections to a past he couldn't control. "I want them terminated immediately," Richard said, his voice carrying the same tone he used when closing failed business ventures. The Williams family? That might create complications. Sudden termination without cause could raise questions, especially if they've been model employees, and if they've already provided materials to your daughter. Then I want those materials recovered. Search their apartment, search Maya's room again, find everything they've given her, and destroy it. Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mr. Blackstone, breaking and entering is significantly more serious than surveillance. The legal risks. I didn't build a $100 million empire by avoiding risks, Morrison. I built it by eliminating threats before they could damage my interests." Richard's eyes had taken on the glacial intensity that made opposing lawyers reconsider their strategies. "Maya is my daughter now. Her past is whatever I choose it to be, and I won't allow some janitor's misguided sense of justice to undermine. 3 years of careful parenting. What about the boy? Marcus Williams appears to have been the primary actor in this situation. He's only 12 years old. Age is irrelevant. He made an adult decision to interfere with my family, and he'll face adult consequences." Richard turned his computer screen toward Morrison, displaying Maya's trust fund information. "Do you see these numbers? Maya will inherit $47 million when she turns 21. That inheritance depends on her remaining grateful for the opportunities I've provided, understanding that her loyalty belongs to the Blackstone family, not to some romanticized memory of a woman who died in a car accident." Morrison made notes in his leather portfolio, though his expression suggested discomfort with the direction their conversation was taking. "What specifically do you want me to do?" "I want Jerome Williams to understand that certain actions have consequences. I want his son to learn that heroism is expensive, and I want every piece of contraband they've provided to Maya returned to me for proper disposal. And if they refuse to cooperate?" Richard's smile was as cold as winter moonlight. "Everyone has vulnerabilities, Morrison. Jerome Williams has a son to protect, a modest income to maintain, and a reputation in the community that could be easily destroyed. I'm sure we can find leverage that will encourage his cooperation." Morrison closed his folder and stood to leave, but paused at the door. "Mr. Blackstone, in my experience, heavy-handed tactics against sympathetic figures can sometimes backfire. The community tends to rally around working-class families who appear to be victims of wealthy persecution." "The community," Richard said dismissively, "will believe whatever version of events provides them with the most comfortable narrative. Jerome Williams is a disgruntled employee who violated his position of trust to interfere with a private family matter. His son is a troubled child who helped his father commit crimes against his employer. When this story reaches the public, they'll be seen as opportunists, not heroes." As Morrison left the study, Richard turned his attention back to his computer screen, but the quarterly reports no longer held his interest. Instead, he pulled up Maya's adoption file, reviewing the legal documents that had made her his daughter and given him complete control over her upbringing. The adoption had been unusually smooth, facilitated by his substantial donation to Sunrise Adoption Services and his sterling reputation in the community. Sarah Chen's death had left Maya with no close relatives willing to take custody, making Richard's interest in providing her with stability and opportunity appear genuinely altruistic. But Richard's motivations had been more complex than simple. Charity. His first wife had been unable to have children, and her death from cancer had left him with a mansion that echoed with emptiness. Maya represented more than a daughter. She was a legacy project, a human investment that would carry the Blackstone name into the next generation with proper appreciation for everything he had built. The key to successful child rearing, Richard believed, was eliminating competing influences. Children who felt grateful for rescue from poverty or tragedy were more likely to remain loyal and obedient. Children who maintained connections to their past were more likely to develop independent thoughts and rebellious impulses. He had calculated that Maya's young age at the time of adoption would make her malleable, that 3 years of careful conditioning would erase most of her memories of her previous life. The photograph's existence had been an unfortunate oversight, but its destruction should have completed the process of helping Maya understand where her loyalty belonged. The intervention of Jerome, Williams and his son threatened to undo everything. Richard opened his desk drawer and withdrew a small digital device, a recording system he had installed throughout the mansion to monitor conversations that might affect his business interests or family security. The system was legal, disclosed in the employment contracts signed by all household staff, though most of them probably hadn't read the fine print carefully enough to understand its implications. He scrolled through the audio files from Sunday evening, searching for any recorded interactions between Maya and the Williams family. What he heard confirmed his worst fears. Maya's voice, thick with emotion. "She's so beautiful, I was starting to forget what she looked like." Marcus Williams? "Now you don't have to." And there's more. The sound of papers rustling, Maya's gasp of wonder, her questions about her mother's letters. Richard listened to the entire encounter, his anger building with each exchange. The boy's words were particularly infuriating. The casual assumption that he had the right to make decisions about Maya's emotional welfare, the arrogant belief that his version of compassion was superior to Richard's structured approach to child development. But the most dangerous element was Maya's response. The joy in her voice, the way she spoke about hiding the materials, her obvious trust in Marcus, all of it represented a fundamental shift in her emotional landscape. She had found a source of strength that existed outside Richard's control, and that strength would make her infinitely more difficult to manage. He picked up his phone and dialed Morrison's number. "I want this resolved within 48 hours, Richard said without preamble. "Whatever it takes." "Understood, Mr. Blackstone. I'll begin implementing our discussion immediately." As Richard ended the call, he felt the familiar satisfaction that came from taking decisive action against emerging threats. Jerome Williams had made a critical error in judgment, assuming that Richard's wealth made him soft, or that his public reputation would prevent him from protecting his interests. He was about to learn that successful businessmen didn't become successful by allowing subordinates to dictate terms. Regardless of their motivations, Maya's salvation was about to become her champion's destruction, and Richard would ensure that the lesson was memorable enough to prevent future interference from anyone else who might mistake his civility for weakness. The battle for Maya's heart was escalating, and her adoptive father was prepared to use every weapon in his considerable arsenal to win. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of gray sky that made promises of rain, and Jerome Williams felt the weight of impending storm in more ways than one. He had called in sick to his day job at the textile mill, claiming a family emergency. That wasn't entirely false. Helping Maya had become a family mission that transcended their normal obligations. Marcus sat at their kitchen table, trying to focus on his math homework while his father paced between the window and the coffee maker, like a caged animal sensing danger. 3 days had passed since their visit to the adoption agency, 3 days since they had restored Maya's connection to her mother's love, and Jerome's instincts were screaming that consequences were coming. "Dad, you're making me nervous," Marcus said, looking up from a page of fractions that might as well have been written in ancient Greek for all the attention he could give them. Something's not right," Jerome muttered, pausing at the window to scan the street below their apartment. "Mr. Blackstone's been different the past 2 days, colder than usual, asking questions about the cleaning schedule, watching everything, like he's looking for something specific." Marcus remembered the way Richard had stared at him during Monday night's cleaning session, not the usual dismissive glance he gave to household staff, but the focused attention of a predator studying potential prey. There had been questions too, seemingly casual inquiries about Marcus's school schedule, his after-school activities, whether he spent much time in the mansion beyond his cleaning duties. Maybe he doesn't suspect anything, Marcus suggested, though his own voice lacked conviction. Maybe he's just having a bad week with business stuff. Jerome's expression remained grim. Men like Richard Blackstone don't have bad weeks by accident, son. They create bad weeks for other people when something threatens their interests. The sound of a car engine idling outside made Jerome freeze at the window. A black sedan had been parked across from the bakery for the past 20 minutes, its occupant occasionally lifting what appeared to be a camera or recording device toward their building. "Marcus," Jerome said quietly, "go pack a bag, clothes. For a few days, your important papers, anything you can't replace." "Are we leaving?" Marcus felt his stomach clench with anxiety. "Where would we go?" "Your Aunt Linda's house in Springfield. She's been asking us to visit for months, anyway." Jerome moved away from the window, his weathered face set with determination. "If Mr. Blackstone wants to play hardball, we'll make sure you're somewhere safe while I handle whatever's coming." Marcus thought about Maya alone in her mansion, surrounded by cold marble and colder guardians, finally beginning to heal from the trauma of losing her mother's photograph. "We can't leave her, Dad. She needs to know someone cares about what happens to her. She needs you alive and free, more than she needs you here, son. If Mr. Blackstone destroys us, we can't help anyone." The knock on their apartment door came with the sharp authority of law enforcement, though Jerome knew it couldn't be police. They hadn't committed any crime serious enough to warrant arrest. Through the peephole, he saw two men in expensive suits, their bearing and demeanor suggesting private security rather than public officials. Jerome Williams? The taller man held up identification that read, "Morrison Security Services. I'm Detective Morrison. We need to discuss some concerns about your employment at the Blackstone estate." Jerome opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged, creating a narrow gap for conversation while maintaining some barrier between his family and whatever threats these men represented. What kind of concerns? The kind that involve theft of private property, violation of confidentiality agreements, and potential criminal trespass, Morrison said smoothly. "Mr. Blackstone is prepared to handle this matter discreetly, but that requires your immediate cooperation. I haven't stolen anything from Mr. Blackstone. Information is property, Mr. Williams. Adoption records, family photographs, personal documents. These items have significant value to their rightful owners. Taking them without permission, even copies, constitutes theft under Connecticut law." Marcus appeared at his father's shoulder, and Morrison's pale eyes fixed on the boy with calculating interest. "Marcus Williams, I presume? 12 years old, student at Roosevelt Middle School, frequently accompanies his father to work at the Blackstone estate." The detailed knowledge sent chills down Jerome's spine. These men had been watching, investigating, building a case that could destroy everything his family had worked to build. "What do you want?" Jerome asked. "Simple cooperation," Morrison's partner spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested expensive education and international experience. "Return all materials you obtained from Sunrise Adoption Services. Remove any items you may have given to Maya Blackstone. Accept termination of your employment with appropriate severance pay. Sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from discussing any aspects of the Blackstone family's private affairs. And if I refuse?" Morrison smiled with the cold satisfaction of someone holding all the cards. "Then we'll be forced to pursue less pleasant alternatives, identity theft charges for impersonating Maya's relative at the adoption agency, criminal trespass for accessing private areas of the Blackstone estate outside your authorized duties, child endangerment for involving your minor son in criminal activities." The threats hung in the air like smoke, poisoning the atmosphere of their modest home with the stench of legal destruction. Jerome understood that wealthy men like Richard Blackstone could make these charges stick regardless of their moral legitimacy, Expensive lawyers could twist any situation to favor their clients' interests. You have 24 hours to comply." Morrison continued, sliding a business card through the door gap. "After that, Mr. Blackstone will assume you've chosen the difficult path, and he'll respond accordingly." As the men left, Jerome watched them climb into their black sedan and drive away with the unhurried confidence of people who had delivered ultimatums before. Marcus pressed close to his father's side, both of them understanding that their small act of kindness had triggered consequences far beyond anything they had imagined. "Are we really going to Aunt Linda's?" Marcus asked. Jerome was quiet for a long moment, staring at Morrison's business card as if it might reveal some hidden escape route from their impossible situation. "Pack your bags, son, but we're not running away." "Then what are we doing?" "We're going to visit some people who might be able to help us fight back." 20 minutes later, they were boarding the city bus toward downtown Hartford. Marcus's backpack, containing clothes and school books, while Jerome carried a manila folder thick with documentation, copies of the photographs and letters they had given Maya, records of Richard's threats, and a growing plan that would either save them all or ensure their complete destruction. Their first stop was the offices of the Hartford Courant, Connecticut's oldest newspaper, and a publication with a long history of investigating corruption among the state's wealthy elite. Jerome had read enough articles about corporate malfeasance to know that journalists loved stories about powerful men abusing their position to hurt working families. Sarah Martinez, the Courant's investigative reporter, listened to their story with growing interest and outrage. A woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much injustice to be easily shocked, Martinez took detailed notes as Jerome described Richard's calculated cruelty and the threats that had followed their attempt to help Maya. "You understand that going public with this story will make you a target," Martinez warned. "Richard Blackstone has significant influence in this state. Political connections, advertising relationships with media outlets, legal resources that could tie you up in court for years." "What's the alternative?" Jerome asked. "We back down, and Maya loses the only people willing to fight for her emotional well-being. She spends the rest of her childhood being psychologically abused by a man who thinks love is a weakness to be eliminated." Martinez studied the photographs of Sarah Chen that Jerome had provided, seeing in the woman's gentle face the same kind eyes that stared out from Maya's school pictures. "This is a compelling story, but I'll need corroboration. Other sources who can verify Richard's behavior, documentation of his threats, evidence that this is part of a pattern rather than an isolated incident." "What kind of evidence?" "Former employees who might have witnessed similar behavior, other families who've had negative interactions with Blackstone's business practices, officials at the adoption agency who remember concerns about his parenting approach." Marcus spoke up for the first time since they'd entered the newsroom. "Mrs. Rodriguez at the adoption agency, she helped us because she was worried about Maya." "She might talk to you," Martinez nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of source I need. Someone with professional credibility who can speak to the broader issues involved." They spent the next 2 hours developing a strategy that would require courage from everyone involved, but offered the possibility of protecting Maya while exposing Richard's psychological abuse to public scrutiny. Martinez would investigate Richard's background, looking for other instances of controlling behavior or questionable business practices. Jerome and Marcus would document any further threats or retaliation attempts. Mrs. Rodriguez would be approached carefully, with assurances that her cooperation would be protected through journalistic shield laws. "This won't be quick," Martinez warned as they prepared to leave. "Good investigative journalism takes time, and rushing to publication with incomplete information will just give Blackstone's lawyers opportunities to discredit the story." "How much time are we talking about?" Jerome asked. 2 weeks minimum, possibly longer if the story becomes complex." "Can you stay safe that long?" Jerome thought about Morrison's 24-hour ultimatum, about Maya waiting in her mansion for signs that someone still cared about her welfare, about the crushing weight of taking on one of Connecticut's most powerful men with nothing but truth as a weapon. "We'll find a way," he said. As they left the current offices, Marcus felt a mixture of hope and terror unlike anything he had experienced in his 12 years of life. They were no longer just trying to help one little girl. They were challenging an entire system that allowed wealthy men to treat children as possessions rather than human beings deserving of love and respect. The bus ride home felt like a journey toward an uncertain battlefield where the stakes were higher than any of them had imagined. But as Marcus clutched his father's weathered hand and watched Hartford's skyline disappear behind them, he knew they had made the only choice their consciences would allow. Maya was worth fighting for, and some battles were too important to lose. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the Blackstone Estate's manicured grounds as Maya sat in her window seat, watching the gardener tend to the autumn flower beds with the methodical care that had made the grounds a showcase of horticultural perfection. In her lap lay one of her mother's letters, the one marked for her 10th birthday, and she read Sarah's words for the 12th time since Marcus had returned them to her. "My darling girl, by now you've learned that life can be challenging, that people aren't always kind, and that strength comes from unexpected places. I hope you're discovering your own strength, the part of you that comes from your grandmother's stubborn spirit and your grandfather's gentle wisdom. Remember that being kind doesn't mean being weak, and that standing up for what's right sometimes requires courage you didn't know you possessed." The words felt prophetic, as if Sarah had somehow known that Maya would need this particular guidance at this particular moment in her life. The past 3 days had been a revelation, not just the joy of recovering her mother's memory, but the understanding that someone outside her controlled world cared enough to risk everything for her happiness. Marcus had given her more than photographs and letters. He had given her proof that love existed beyond Richard's carefully constructed boundaries, that kindness could come from unexpected sources, and that she wasn't as alone as she had believed. But Maya was also old enough to understand that actions had consequences, and she worried constantly about what might happen to Marcus and his father when Richard discovered their interference. She had lived with her adoptive father long enough to recognize the signs of his mounting anger, the way his jaw tightened during meals, the increased frequency of his room inspections, the cold intensity of his stare when he thought she wasn't looking. Richard was planning something. Maya could feel it in the mansion's atmosphere, the way tension gathered before thunderstorms, making the air itself feel heavy with impending violence. A soft knock on her bedroom door made her quickly hide the letter beneath her pillow, a reflex that had become automatic since recovering her mother's materials. Richard's inspections had become daily occurrences, his searches more thorough and invasive as he sought evidence of whatever was making her seem more confident and independent. "Come in," she called, arranging herself at her desk as if she had been working on homework. To her surprise, it was Mrs. Chen, the mansion's head housekeeper, who entered carrying a tea service on a silver tray. Mrs. Chen had worked for the Blackstone family for over 15 years, arriving as a young immigrant from Taiwan and gradually earning Richard's trust through meticulous attention to detail and absolute discretion about family affairs. "I thought you might enjoy some tea," Mrs. Chen said in her careful English, setting the tray on Maya's study table. "You seem troubled lately." Maya studied the older woman's face, searching for signs of whether this was a genuine gesture of kindness or another of Richard's tests. Mrs. Chen had always been professionally polite but emotionally distant, maintaining the careful boundaries that employment in the Blackstone household required. "I'm fine," Maya said cautiously, "just tired from lessons." Mrs. Chen poured tea into delicate china cups, her movements precise and practiced. "Your father is concerned about you. He says you've been acting differently since last week." The words felt like a trap, and Maya chose her response carefully. "I don't think I've been acting differently. I'm trying to focus more on my studies." "He found something during his inspection last night," Mrs. Chen continued, her voice neutral, but her eyes watching Maya's reaction intently. A small piece of paper behind your dresser. It looked like part of a letter. Maya's heart stopped. They had been so careful about hiding everything, but apparently not careful enough. If Richard had found evidence of the letter's existence, it was only a matter of time before he discovered the rest of her hidden treasures. "I don't know what you mean," Maya said, but her voice trembled with the strain of deception. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, studying Maya's frightened face with an expression that seemed to soften despite her professional reserve. When she spoke again, her voice carried a gentleness that Maya hadn't heard before. "I knew your mother," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Sarah Chen. We shared the same last name, though we weren't related. She worked at the hospital where I took my own daughter for treatments. She was very kind to us during a difficult time." Maya felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected connection to her mother's memory. "You knew her? She spoke about you often. How proud she was. How much she loved you. How worried she was about what would happen if something ever happened to her." Mrs. Chen leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. "She would want you to be happy, little one. She would want you to know that you came from love, even if that love seems far away now." "Why are you telling me this?" Maya asked, hardly daring to hope that she had found another ally in her isolated world. "Because I have a daughter too. Because I understand that children need to know where they come from and who loved them before." Mrs. Chen glanced toward the door, ensuring they weren't being overheard. "And because some secrets are worth keeping, especially when they protect a child's heart." Maya felt a surge of gratitude and relief so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. "Does that mean?" "It means that if anyone were to ask me about pieces of paper or hidden letters, I would say that children sometimes keep all sorts of meaningless scraps, homework assignments, notes from friends, drawings. They're not ready to share. It would be very difficult to tell the difference between important papers and childhood clutter." Maya understood the message. Mrs. Chen was offering protection, providing cover for the materials that connected her to her mother's love. But she was also warning Maya that Richard's search was intensifying and that greater care would be needed to keep everything safe. "Thank you," Maya whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Your mother was a good woman who died too young," Mrs. Chen said, rising from her chair and smoothing her uniform. "But her love didn't die with her. Love like that finds ways to survive, to protect what matters most." As Mrs. Chen left the room, Maya felt a new kind of strength settling into her bones. She wasn't just connected to Marcus and his father anymore. She was part of a growing network of people who understood that love was worth protecting, even when that protection required courage and sacrifice. That evening, as Richard conducted his nightly inspection with increased thoroughness, Maya watched him search through her belongings with the detached interest of someone who knew her real treasures were beyond his reach. He found nothing significant. Mrs. Chen had been right about the difficulty of distinguishing between meaningful papers and childhood clutter. But Maya could see the frustration building in Richard's cold eyes, the way his jaw tightened when his searches came up empty, the calculating look that suggested he was planning a different approach to the problem of her newfound independence. "Maya," he said as he prepared to leave her room, "I'll be hosting some business associates for dinner tomorrow evening. I expect you to join us to demonstrate the poise and sophistication that reflect well on our family." "Yes, Father," Maya replied, though something in his tone made her nervous. These are important people: investors, political figures, community leaders. The conversations will be adult in nature, but I trust you'll conduct yourself with appropriate maturity. Maya nodded, sensing that tomorrow's dinner would be more than a social occasion. Richard was planning something that required witnesses, something that would use her presence to accomplish goals she couldn't yet understand. As her bedroom door closed behind him, Maya carefully retrieved one of her mother's letters from its hiding place and read Sarah's words about courage and strength. Whatever Richard was planning, she would face it with the knowledge that she was loved, that people were fighting for her, and that her mother's spirit lived on in every choice she made to honor that love. The battle for her heart was far from over, but Maya was no longer fighting alone. Wednesday evening arrived with the weight of destiny, and Marcus Williams stood at the service entrance of the Blackstone mansion with his father, both of them knowing this might be their final night, working in the house that had become the center of their moral universe. Morrison's 24-hour ultimatum had expired 6 hours ago, and Richard's silence felt more ominous than any direct threat could have been. Jerome carried his cleaning supplies with the same methodical precision he had maintained for 3 years, but his weathered hands trembled slightly as he unlocked the service door. They had decided against fleeing to Aunt Linda's house, choosing instead to maintain their normal routine while Sarah Martinez continued her investigation, and Mrs. Rodriguez prepared to go on record about the adoption agency's concerns regarding Maya's welfare. "Remember," Jerome whispered as they entered the mansion's marble foyer, "we finish our normal cleaning duties, check on Maya, if we can do it safely, and get out before Mr. Blackstone returns from his dinner party." Marcus nodded, though his attention was immediately drawn to the unusual activity in the mansion's main dining room. Through the archway, he could see the formal table set for 8 people, with the kind of elaborate place settings reserved for Richard's most important business associates. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, reflecting rainbows across walls, lined with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to watch the proceedings with disapproval. "Something's different tonight," Marcus observed. Jerome had noticed it too, the way the household staff moved with nervous energy, the formal flower arrangements that suggested this dinner was more significant than Richard's usual business entertaining, the presence of additional security personnel positioned discreetly around the mansion's perimeter. They began their cleaning routine in the library, working with practiced efficiency, while straining to hear any conversations that might reveal Richard's plans. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 7 o'clock, marking the arrival of the first dinner guests, voices in the entry hall that carried the confidence and authority of people accustomed to wielding power in Connecticut's business and political circles. Marcus recognized some of the names being mentioned: State Senator Patricia Walsh, Judge Harold Morrison, real estate magnate David Chen, and several others whose photographs regularly appeared in the Hartford Courant's business section. This wasn't just a social dinner. It was a gathering of the kind of influential people who could make problems disappear or create insurmountable obstacles for anyone who threatened their interests. Mr. Blackstone is building an audience, Jerome realized grimly. Whatever he's planning to do tonight, he wants witnesses who can vouch for his version of events. They moved through their cleaning duties with growing unease, working their way closer to the family wing where Maya's bedroom was located. The sound of laughter and conversation from the dining room created a surreal backdrop to their mission, the wealthy and powerful enjoying expensive wine and gourmet cuisine, while a little girl 3 floors above them faced whatever psychological warfare Richard had prepared. As they reached the second-floor landing, Marcus heard something that made his blood freeze: Maya's voice, younger and more frightened than he had ever heard it, coming from the direction of the dining room. "She's down there," he whispered to his father. He made her join the dinner party. Jerome's face hardened with understanding. Richard wasn't just entertaining guests. He was using Maya as a prop in whatever performance he had orchestrated, forcing her to participate in her own psychological destruction while surrounded by people whose social standing would lend credibility to his narrative. "We need to get closer," Jerome said, abandoning their cleaning cart to move toward the main staircase that would give them a better view of the dining room proceedings. They positioned themselves in the shadows of the curved staircase, where ornate railings provided cover while allowing them to observe the dinner party through the archway. What they saw made Marcus's stomach clench with protective rage. Maya sat at the far end of the formal dining table, dwarfed by the massive mahogany furniture and surrounded by adults whose expensive clothes and confident demeanor emphasized her vulnerability. She wore a white dress that made her look even younger than her 7 years. Her dark hair pulled back in a style that gave her the appearance of a porcelain doll rather than a living child. Richard stood at the head of the table, wineglass in hand, addressing his guests with the polished delivery of someone accustomed to commanding attention in corporate boardrooms and political fundraisers. As you can see, Richard was saying, his voice carrying clearly across the marble floors. Maya has adjusted beautifully to life in our family. The transition from her previous circumstances has been remarkable, a testament to the power of stability, education, and proper guidance in shaping a child's development. Senator Walsh nodded approvingly. The adoption process can be so beneficial when handled correctly. You've clearly provided her with opportunities she never would have had otherwise. Indeed, Richard continued, moving to stand behind Maya's chair with his hands resting on her shoulders in a gesture that appeared paternal, but made her visibly tense. Maya understands how fortunate she is to have escaped the limitations of her birth circumstances. Don't you, sweetheart? Maya's voice was barely audible. Yes, Father. Her birth mother was a single nurse who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, Richard explained to his audience, his tone suggesting he was discussing a business acquisition rather than a human tragedy. Tragically killed in a car accident, leaving Maya with no family resources and limited prospects for her future. Judge Morrison, whose name Marcus suddenly realized matched that of the private investigator who had threatened them, leaned forward with interest. How old was she when you adopted her? 4 years old. Young enough to adapt, but old enough to remember what her life was like before. Richard's fingers tightened slightly on Maya's shoulders. She's learned to appreciate the difference between her current security and her previous uncertainty. Marcus watched Maya's face, seeing the way she kept her eyes focused on her untouched dinner plate, the careful control of her breathing that suggested she was fighting not to cry, the subtle flinch when Richard's hands moved on her shoulders. This wasn't just a dinner party. It was a carefully orchestrated display of Richard's control over Maya, designed to establish his narrative about their relationship before any alternative version could gain credibility. Of course, Richard continued, there have been some challenges. Children sometimes become confused about their loyalties, especially when well-meaning but misguided individuals attempt to interfere with the healing process. David Chen, who shared last name with Maya, seemed deliberate rather than coincidental, set down his wine glass with interest. What kind of interference? Recently, some of our household staff took it upon themselves to provide Maya with materials from her past, photographs, letters, documents that we had chosen not to share immediately because of their potential to cause emotional distress. Richard's voice remained calm and reasonable, but Marcus could see the calculated malice behind his civilized facade. Their actions, though perhaps motivated by misplaced compassion, demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of child psychology and adoption best practices. Senator Walsh frowned with apparent concern. That sounds like a serious violation of your family's privacy. Indeed. More troubling, they involved a minor child, their own son, in these unauthorized activities, essentially using him to gain access to private areas of our home and manipulate my daughter's emotional state. Maya's head snapped up at the mention of Marcus, her eyes wide with alarm as she began to understand the true purpose of this dinner. Richard wasn't just entertaining guests. He was building a legal and social foundation for destroying the Williams family while positioning himself as the victim of their misguided interference. Have you contacted the authorities? Judge Morrison asked, his tone suggesting professional interest in the legal implications. I believe in handling family matters with discretion when possible, Richard replied smoothly. However, if these individuals persist in their inappropriate behavior, legal action may become necessary to protect Maya's emotional well-being and our family's security. Marcus felt his father's hand grip his shoulder as they both realized the full scope of Richard's strategy. This dinner wasn't just about establishing credibility for his version of events. It was about creating witnesses who would remember hearing about the Williams family's crimes before any alternative narrative could reach public attention. When Sarah Martinez's investigation eventually became public, these influential guests would already have been primed to view Jerome and Marcus as misguided troublemakers rather than heroic advocates for a vulnerable child. Richard was controlling the narrative before it could be written, poisoning the well of public opinion with surgical precision. "The boy is only 12 years old," Senator Walsh observed. "Surely he was just following his father's instructions," which makes the father's actions even more reprehensible, Richard said, his voice hardening with calculated anger. "Using your own child to commit crimes against your employer demonstrates a fundamental lack of moral judgment that calls into question everything about their character and motivations." Maya tried to speak, her small voice barely audible above the clinking of crystal and silver. Marcus was just trying to help. "Maya," Richard's voice cut through her words like a blade, his hands tightening on her shoulders in a gesture that appeared supportive but was clearly restraining. "These are adult matters that you don't fully understand. Your emotional attachment to someone who manipulated your feelings is exactly why children need protection from inappropriate influences." Tears began to stream down Maya's face, but she continued trying to defend the people who had shown her kindness. "He didn't manipulate me. He gave me back my mother's—" "Enough." Richard's command silenced her immediately, but not before his guests had witnessed the exchange. "You see how confused she's become? This is precisely why unauthorized interference with adopted children can be so damaging." The dinner party continued around Maya's quiet crying, the adults discussing legal strategies and social obligations as if her emotional distress was merely an unfortunate side effect of necessary business. Marcus watched from the shadows, feeling helpless rage at the way Richard was using Maya's own love for her mother and gratitude toward her protectors as evidence of her mental confusion. "We should go," Jerome whispered urgently, "before they realize we're here." But Marcus couldn't tear himself away from the sight of Maya surrounded by people who were calmly planning the destruction of everyone who had tried to help her. Her white dress and careful posture made her look like a sacrifice offered up to the gods of wealth and power, and Marcus understood that they were witnessing something more than psychological abuse. They were watching the systematic destruction of a child's ability to trust in love and justice. As they finally retreated from their hiding place, Marcus carried with him the image of Maya's tear-streaked face and the sound of Richard's civilized voice describing their family's crimes to an audience that would soon carry those lies into Connecticut's most influential circles. The battle for Maya's heart had become a war for her very soul, and Richard Blackstone was proving himself a master strategist who understood that sometimes the most effective weapons were the ones that looked like protection. Maya sat in her prison of privilege, surrounded by people who would remember her as confused and manipulated rather than brave and loving, while the man who claimed to be her father used her own emotions against her like a skilled torturer who understood that the deepest wounds were the ones that couldn't be seen. The dinner party continued, but Maya's childhood was ending with each lie that passed for truth, each manipulation that masqueraded as love, each moment that taught her that caring about others would only bring them pain. Marcus and Jerome slipped away into the night, carrying the terrible knowledge that they had just witnessed the methodical destruction of everything they had tried to build, and that their act of love was being transformed into a weapon against the very child they had sought to protect. The next morning dawned cold and gray, with November winds stripping the last autumn leaves from the trees around Roosevelt Middle School. Marcus sat in his 7th grade English class, staring at a page of vocabulary words that might as well have been written in an alien language for all the attention he could give them. Sleep had been impossible after witnessing Richard's dinner party performance, and his mind kept replaying Maya's terrified face as she tried to defend him to an audience that had already been convinced of his guilt. Mrs. Patterson, his English teacher, was discussing metaphors and symbolism in their current reading assignment. But Marcus's thoughts were consumed with the very real symbols of power and powerlessness that he had observed the night before. The formal dining room with its crystal and silver had become a courtroom where Richard served as both prosecutor and judge, while Maya was forced to play the role of evidence rather than witness. "Marcus Williams," Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through his distraction. "Perhaps you could share your thoughts on the symbolism in Chapter 12? Marcus looked up, realizing that 25 pairs of eyes were staring at him with the mixture of sympathy and curiosity that 7th graders reserved for classmates who were obviously dealing with problems beyond homework and social drama. "Wow, Ma. Sorry, Mrs. Patterson. I was thinking about something else." "I can see that. Would you like to share what's on your mind?" Sometimes discussing our real concerns can be more valuable than analyzing fictional ones. Marcus felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to tell the truth, to explain that he was worried about a little girl who was being psychologically tortured by her adoptive father, that he had tried to help her and might have made her situation worse. That powerful people were planning to destroy his family because they had dared to show compassion to someone who needed it, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain something so complex and devastating to people who lived in a world where the worst problems were failed tests and cafeteria gossip? "It's just family stuff," he said quietly. Mrs. Patterson studied his face with the practiced eye of someone who had taught troubled children for over 20 years. "Why don't you visit the guidance counselor during lunch? Sometimes it helps to talk through family concerns with someone trained to listen." Marcus nodded, though he knew that no guidance counselor would be equipped to handle the moral and legal complexities of their situation. "How do you explain to a school official that you've been conducting covert operations to help an emotionally abused child, and that your actions have triggered a campaign of retaliation by one of Connecticut's most powerful men?" The morning dragged by with agonizing slowness, each class period feeling like an exercise in pretending that normal life could continue while everything important was falling apart. During lunch, Marcus found himself in the guidance office, sitting across from Mr. Rodriguez, a kind man whose earnest desire to help was matched only by his complete inability to comprehend the scope of Marcus's actual problems. "Sometimes when our parents are dealing with work stress, it affects the whole family," Mr. Rodriguez was saying, having interpreted Marcus's vague explanations as typical adolescent anxiety about adult concerns. "The important thing is to remember that you're not responsible for solving your father's problems." But Marcus was responsible, at least partially. It had been his idea to help Maya, his plan to obtain the photographs and letters, his decision to risk everything for someone he barely knew. Jerome had supported him and shared the risks, but the initial impulse had come from Marcus's 12-year-old sense of justice. "What if trying to help someone just made things worse for them?" Marcus asked. "That's a very mature question," Mr. Rodriguez replied. "Sometimes our best intentions don't lead to the outcomes we hoped for, but that doesn't mean we were wrong to try helping. It just means we need to learn from the experience and find better ways to show compassion. What if the person you tried to help is in danger because of what you did?" Mr. Rodriguez leaned forward with increased concern. "Marcus, are we talking about a hypothetical situation, or is there someone specific you're worried about?" Marcus hesitated, torn between his desire to find adult help and his understanding that involving school officials could create additional complications for Maya. If Child Protective Services became involved based on his report, Richard would undoubtedly find ways to discredit any allegations while positioning himself as the victim of a vindictive campaign by disgruntled employees. "It's complicated," Marcus said finally. "Most important things are complicated, but sometimes talking through the complications helps us see clearer solutions." Before Marcus could respond, the guidance office door opened and Mrs. Patterson entered with an expression of unusual urgency. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are 2 men here asking to speak with Marcus. They say they're conducting an investigation related to his family." Marcus felt his stomach drop into his shoes. Morrison and his partner had come, to his school, a violation of the informal boundaries that usually kept adult conflicts away from children's educational environments. Their presence here meant that Richard was escalating his campaign beyond private threats into public intimidation. What kind of investigation? Mr. Rodriguez asked, his protective instincts activated by the obvious distress on Marcus's face. They mentioned theft and trespassing charges, Mrs. Patterson replied. They have identification from Morrison's security services. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. I need to call my dad. Marcus, Mr. Rodriguez said gently, if there are serious allegations involved, you shouldn't speak with anyone without your parent present. School policy requires that we notify your father before allowing any outside interviews. But Marcus was already moving toward the door, driven by a panic that made his chest feel tight and his vision seem unnaturally bright. Morrison's arrival at his school meant that Richard was no longer content with private threats. He was ready to make their conflict public, using the weight of his reputation and connections to crush anyone who had dared to oppose his will. I need to go home, Marcus said, his voice cracking with stress. I need to warn my dad. As he ran through the school hallways toward the main exit, Marcus understood that the careful strategy he and Jerome had developed with Sarah Martinez was about to be tested sooner than anyone had expected. Richard wasn't waiting for the media investigation to unfold. He was launching a preemptive strike designed to discredit them before their story could gain any traction. The battle for Maya's heart was becoming a war for his family's survival, and Marcus was beginning to understand that sometimes doing the right thing meant accepting that you might lose everything in the process. But as he burst through the school's front doors into the cold November air, running toward home with Morrison's threats chasing him like predators, Marcus knew that he would make the same choice again. Maya's tearful face from the dinner party haunted his memory, reminding him that some people were worth any sacrifice, and that love was always worth fighting for, even when the odds of victory seemed impossible. The real battle was just beginning, and Marcus Williams was about to discover what it truly meant to stand up for someone who couldn't protect themselves. Marcus burst through the door of their apartment above the bakery to find his father sitting at their kitchen table with Sarah Martinez, the investigative reporter from the Hartford Courant. Spread across the scarred wooden surface were documents, photographs, and legal papers that suggested their quiet resistance had evolved into something much larger and more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. Marcus. Jerome rose from his chair, relief flooding his weathered face. The school called. They said some investigators were asking questions about you. Morrison came to my school, Dad. He's trying to scare me, trying to make this public so everyone thinks we're criminals before they hear the real story. Sarah Martinez looked up from her laptop, her steel gray hair catching the afternoon light, streaming through their modest windows. Actually, that might be exactly what we needed. Marcus stared at her in confusion. How is it good that they're coming after me at school? Because it shows desperation, Martinez explained, gesturing for Marcus to join them at the table. When powerful people start making aggressive moves against children, it usually means they're afraid of something. And in this case, Richard Blackstone should be afraid. She turned her laptop screen toward Marcus, revealing a document that made his heart race with hope and terror in equal measure. The letterhead read, Connecticut Department of Children and Families, and the subject line contained Maya's name. Mrs. Rodriguez from the adoption agency decided to go on record about her concerns regarding Maya's welfare, Martinez continued. More importantly, she's filed a formal report with DCF requesting a welfare check and psychological evaluation. Jerome leaned forward, his expression intense. What does that mean for Maya? It means that Child Protective Services will be conducting an unannounced visit to the Blackstone estate within the next 48 hours. They'll interview Maya privately, assess her living conditions, and evaluate whether there are grounds for concern about her emotional well-being. Marcus felt a surge of hope tempered by realistic worry. But Mr. Blackstone is really good at making everything look perfect. He'll prepare Maya, coach her on what to say, Make sure she seems happy and grateful. That's where your story becomes crucial, Martinez said. DCF investigators are trained to look beyond surface appearances, but they need specific incidents to investigate. Your first-hand account of the photograph burning, combined with Mrs. Rodriguez's professional concerns and the evidence of psychological manipulation you witnessed at the dinner party, gives them concrete examples to explore. She pulled out a digital recorder and set it on the table between them. I need you to tell me everything, Marcus. Every detail you remember about what happened that night, what you heard Mr. Blackstone say, how Maya reacted. Don't leave anything out, no matter how small it seems. For the next hour, Marcus relived the trauma of watching Richard destroy Maya's most precious possession, describing the little girl's desperate pleas, the cold calculation in her adoptive father's voice, the way she had collapsed to her knees, reaching for ashes that could never be reassembled. He talked about Maya's transformation after receiving her mother's photographs and letters, the way hope had returned to her eyes, and the crushing sight of her being used as a prop in Richard's dinner party performance. This is powerful testimony, Martinez said when Marcus finished. But we need to be prepared for Richard's counterattack. He's already started painting you and your father as criminals who violated his family's privacy. His dinner party guests will back up his version of events unless we can present compelling evidence to the contrary. Jerome rubbed his weathered hands across his face, the weight of their situation pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. What kind of evidence? Documentation of threats, recordings of intimidating behavior, witness statements from other people who've observed Richard's controlling tendencies. Martinez consulted her notes. I've been investigating his background, and there's a pattern here. 2 previous business associates have complained about his vindictive behavior when they opposed his wishes. A former housekeeper left abruptly 3 years ago after what she described as concerning incidents involving Maya. Can you find her? Marcus asked. The housekeeper? I'm trying. Maria Santos. She moved back to Puerto Rico after leaving the Blackstone employment, but I have contacts who might be able to locate her. Martinez's expression grew serious. Marcus, I need you to understand something. Once this story goes public, there's no going back. Richard Blackstone will use every resource at his disposal to destroy your family's reputation. Are you prepared for that? Marcus thought about Maya's tear-streaked face at the dinner party, about the way she had tried to defend him even while surrounded by people who had been convinced of his guilt. He thought about the letters from her mother that spoke of courage and standing up for what was right, and about the promise he had made to ensure Maya knew she wasn't alone. I'm prepared, he said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his stomach. Then we move forward. I'll have the story ready for publication by tomorrow evening, pending final verification of sources and legal review. Once it hits the stands, the public pressure should force DCF to conduct a thorough investigation rather than accepting Richard's surface explanations. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs outside their apartment made all 3 of them freeze. Jerome moved to the window, peering down at the street through the worn curtains. It's Morrison, he said grimly, and he's got 2 uniformed police officers with him. Martinez immediately began gathering her documents and closing her laptop. Is there a back exit? Fire escape through the bedroom window, Jerome replied, but his voice carried resignation rather than panic. Though maybe it's time we stopped running. Marcus felt his father's words settle into his chest like truth finding its home. They had been operating in shadows and secrecy, trying to help Maya while avoiding direct confrontation with Richard's power. But every strategy they employed seemed to give Richard new opportunities to control the narrative and paint them as villains rather than heroes. Dad's right, Marcus said, surprising himself with his own courage. If we keep hiding people, we'll think we really are criminals. Maybe it's time to stand up and tell the truth, even if it's scary. The knock on their door came with official authority. 3 sharp raps that demanded immediate response. Jerome straightened his shoulders, smoothed his work shirt, and walked to the door with the dignity of a man who had nothing to hide, except his love for a little girl who needed protection. Jerome Williams, the police officer, was young, probably new enough to the force that he still believed in clear distinctions between right and wrong. We have a warrant to search these premises for stolen property and to bring you in for questioning regarding theft and trespassing charges. What kind of stolen property? Jerome asked calmly. Documents and photographs taken from the Blackstone estate and Sunrise Adoption Services without authorization, Morrison answered, stepping forward with the predatory satisfaction of someone who believed victory was within reach. Those materials were freely given to help a child maintain connection to her deceased mother, Jerome replied. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty of caring more about a little girl's emotional well-being than about her adoptive father's desire to erase her past. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus saw something flicker in the young police officer's eyes, a moment of doubt about whether they were arresting criminals or destroying heroes. It was the first crack in Richard's carefully constructed narrative, the first sign that truth might be more powerful than money and influence. As the officers began their search of the apartment, Marcus caught Sarah Martinez's eye. She nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding that the story was no longer about timing or strategy. It was about ensuring that Maya's voice was heard, above the noise of adult conflicts and legal maneuvering. The battle for Maya's heart had become a fight for the soul of justice itself, and Marcus Williams was about to discover whether a 12-year-old's love could triumph over a wealthy man's power. The search began in earnest, but Marcus felt a strange calm settling over him. They had hidden nothing because they had done nothing wrong. The only crime they had committed was caring about someone who couldn't protect herself, and if that was enough to destroy them, then at least they would be destroyed for the right reasons. Maya was worth this fight, and some battles were too important to lose. The Blackstone mansion had never felt more like a prison than it did on Thursday afternoon, as Maya sat in her bedroom window seat watching unmarked cars circle the Siku estate's perimeter like sharks sensing blood in the water. Something was happening, something that made Richard pace through the marble halls with barely controlled fury, his cell phone pressed to his ear as he conducted urgent conversations with lawyers, investigators, and people whose names Maya didn't recognize, but whose importance was clear from the deference in her adoptive father's voice. Mrs. Chen had been unusually attentive since morning, bringing Maya extra snacks and speaking in the gentle tones usually reserved for sick children or grieving relatives. Her kindness felt like preparation for some coming trauma, and Maya's 7-year-old intuition told her that whatever storm was approaching would determine the course of her entire future. The sound of the front doorbell echoing through the mansion's marble foyer made Maya's heart race with anticipation and dread. She pressed herself against her bedroom window, trying to see who was visiting, but the angle prevented her from identifying the figures standing on the covered portico. Richard's voice carried up the curved staircase, transformed from its usual controlled politeness into something sharp and defensive. "This is highly irregular. I wasn't given advance notice of any inspection." A woman's voice responded with professional calm. "Unannounced visits are standard procedure when concerns are raised about a child's welfare, Mr. Blackstone. I'm Dr. Patricia Wells from the Department of Children and Families, and this is my colleague, Ms. Jennifer Torres. We're here to conduct a routine assessment of Maya's living situation and emotional well-being." Maya felt hope and terror collide in her chest. Someone had called the authorities about her, which meant someone cared enough to risk Richard's anger and fight for her protection. But she also understood that Richard was brilliant at presenting himself as the perfect father, and that she would need to be braver than she had ever been if the truth was going to emerge from this inspection. Of course, Richard's voice had returned to its polished smoothness. "I'm always happy to cooperate with official inquiries, though I must say I'm puzzled about what could have prompted this visit. Maya is thriving in our family environment." Footsteps on marble stairs announced their approach toward her bedroom, and Maya quickly moved away from the window to sit at her study desk, arranging herself to look like the perfect student that Richard expected her to be. But as the footsteps grew closer, she made a decision that would require every ounce of courage her mother's letters had taught her to possess. The knock on her door was gentle, but authoritative. "Maya, my name is Dr. Wells. I'd like to speak with you for a few minutes." "Come in," Maya called, her voice steadier than she felt. Dr. Wells entered first, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the sort of practical clothing that suggested she cared more about doing her job well than making impressions. Behind her came Ms. Torres, younger but carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone trained to recognize signs of child abuse and neglect. Richard followed them into the room, positioning himself near Maya's chair with the protective stance of a concerned father. "Maya, these ladies are from a government agency that makes sure children are happy and healthy. They just want to ask you a few questions about how much you enjoy living here." Dr. Wells studied the interaction with professional interest, noting the way Richard's presence immediately changed Maya's posture from relaxed to guarded, the way his hand on her shoulder seemed to anchor her in place rather than comfort her. "Actually, Mr. Blackstone, I'd prefer to speak with Maya privately. It helps children feel more comfortable sharing their genuine feelings when they're not worried about disappointing anyone." "I don't think that's necessary," Richard replied smoothly. "Maya and I have no secrets from each other. She's perfectly comfortable expressing herself in my presence." Maya felt the familiar weight of Richard's expectations pressing down on her, the unspoken command to perform the role of grateful adopted daughter for these official visitors. But she also remembered her mother's letter about courage coming from unexpected places and Marcus's willingness to risk everything for her happiness. "I'd like to talk to them alone," Maya said quietly, her small voice carrying across the room like a declaration of independence. Richard's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder, a gesture invisible to casual observation, but unmistakable to someone who had learned to read his moods through years of careful survival. "Maya, sweetheart, there's no need to exclude me from conversations about your welfare." "Mr. Blackstone," Dr. Wells said firmly, "Connecticut law requires that DCF interviews with minor children be conducted without parental presence when requested by the child. I'm going to have to ask you to wait downstairs while we speak with Maya." The battle of wills played out in charged silence, with Richard's carefully controlled fury meeting Dr. Wells's professional authority. Maya held her breath, understanding that this moment would determine whether truth or performance would shape the investigation. "Of course," Richard said finally, his voice returning to its practiced civility. "Maya, remember to answer their questions honestly and completely. These ladies need to understand how happy you are here." As the door closed behind him, Maya felt simultaneously liberated and terrified. She was alone with adults whose job was to protect children, but she had no way of knowing whether they would believe her story or dismiss her concerns as the fantasies of a confused little girl. Dr. Wells settled into the chair across from Maya's desk, while Ms. Torres positioned herself near the window, creating a triangle that felt supportive rather than interrogational. "Maya, we're here because someone expressed concern about your emotional well-being. Can you tell us how you've been feeling lately?" Maya looked into Dr. Wells' kind eyes and made another decision that would require courage beyond her years. "Are you going to tell him what I say?" "Not if telling him would put you in danger or make you feel unsafe," Dr. Wells replied. "Our job is to make sure you're protected and cared for appropriately." "What if I tell you something that makes him really angry?" Ms. Torres leaned forward with increased concern. "Maya, has your father ever hurt you when he was angry?" Maya thought about how to explain psychological wounds that left no visible marks, emotional violence that was too sophisticated for a 7-year-old's vocabulary. "He doesn't hit me, but he destroys things that make me happy, things that help me remember my birth mother." Dr. Wells and Ms. Torres exchanged glances that confirmed Maya's suspicions. Someone had already told them about the photograph burning and Richard's systematic attempts to erase her connection to Sarah's memory. "Can you tell us about your birth mother?" Dr. Wells asked gently. Maya's face lit up with the first genuine smile these social workers had seen since entering the mansion. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she was a nurse. She had the kindest eyes and the gentlest hands. And she wrote me letters to read when I got older because she wanted to be part of my whole life, even though she couldn't be there in person. How do you know about these letters? Maya hesitated, understanding that her answer would determine Marcus's fate as much as her own. Someone who cares about me helped me get copies from the adoption agency. Someone who saw what happened when Father burned my mother's photograph and wanted to make sure I knew I was loved. The words tumbled out then, the story of Marcus's midnight visit, the joy of rediscovering her mother's face and words, the way Richard had used her at his dinner party to build a case against the people who had shown her kindness. Maya spoke with the clarity that comes from finally being allowed to tell the truth, her small voice growing stronger as she described each incident of psychological manipulation and emotional abuse. Dr. Wells took careful notes while Ms. Torres documented the conversation, both women recognizing that they were hearing testimony about sophisticated child abuse that would require expert intervention to address effectively. Maya, Dr. Wells said when the story was complete, you've been very brave to tell us all of this. Now, I need to ask you an important question. Do you feel safe living here? Maya was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer a question that would shape the rest of her childhood. I feel safe from being physically hurt, she said finally, but I don't feel safe from having the people I love destroyed because they tried to help me. It was the most honest answer she could give, and it carried more weight than any formal accusation could have managed. Dr. Wells closed her notebook and looked directly into Maya's eyes with the intensity of someone making a promise. Maya, I want you to know that what you've told us today is going to make a difference. There are going to be changes in your life, and some of them might feel scary at first. But I promise you that our job is to make sure you're protected and that the people who care about you are protected too. As the social workers prepared to leave, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced since the night Marcus returned her mother's letters. Hope that truth might actually be more powerful than money and influence, and that justice might exist for little girls who were brave enough to speak it. The battle for her heart was entering its final phase, and Maya Chen Blackstone was no longer fighting alone. The Hartford County Police Station buzzed with the controlled chaos of Thursday afternoon activity as Jerome Williams sat in an interrogation room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale coffee. Across from him, Detective Frank Morrison, apparently Judge Morrison's nephew, a connection that explained his willingness to pursue questionable charges, reviewed a file thick with what appeared to be damning evidence but felt suspiciously manufactured. Let's go over this one more time, Mr. Williams, Morrison said, his tone suggesting patience he clearly didn't feel. You admit to impersonating Maya Blackstone's relative at Sunrise Adoption Services? I told them I was interested in helping. Maya connect with her mother's memory, Jerome replied calmly. I never claimed to be a blood relative, but you used deception to obtain confidential documents. I used compassion to help a child recover materials that should never have been withheld from her in the first place. Jerome's weathered hands remained steady on the metal table, despite the stress fractures he felt spreading through his chest. Elena Rodriguez can confirm that she provided those materials willingly because she was concerned about Maya's emotional welfare. Morrison made notes with the mechanical precision of someone going through motions rather than seeking truth. And you admit to entering the Blackstone mansion outside your authorized duties to deliver these stolen materials to a minor child? I delivered letters from a dead mother to her grieving daughter. If that's a crime in Connecticut, then your legal system has bigger problems than my employment decisions. The door opened to admit Sarah Martinez, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone prepared for battle. Detective Morrison, I'm here representing Mr. Williams as a journalist documenting potential civil rights violations in this case. Morrison's carefully controlled demeanor cracked slightly. This is a criminal investigation. not a media opportunity. This is a civil rights story disguised as a criminal investigation, Martinez replied, settling into the chair. Beside Jerome with practiced authority, I have documentation of Mr. Blackstone's systematic psychological abuse of his adopted daughter, witness statements about his threats against working-class families who opposed his will, and evidence of judicial misconduct involving your family, connections to this case. I don't know what you're implying. I'm stating directly that Judge Harold Morrison, who signed the search warrant for Mr. Williams' apartment, is your uncle. I'm stating that Mr. Blackstone hosted a dinner party 3 nights ago where he preemptively briefed influential community members about his version of these events. I'm stating that this investigation has been corrupted by conflicts of interest and personal relationships that make impartial justice impossible. Jerome watched Morrison's face cycle through surprise, anger, and calculation as he processed the implications of Martinez's research. The detective had clearly expected to handle a simple case of employee theft, not a media investigation into Connecticut's power structures and their impact on child welfare. Mr. Williams, Morrison said, attempting to regain control of the interrogation, regardless of any alleged motivations or relationships, you committed specific acts that violated Connecticut law. Are you prepared to accept responsibility for those acts? Jerome was quiet for a moment, thinking about Maya's tear-streaked face at Richard's dinner party, about Marcus's courage in risking everything for someone he barely knew, about the letters from Sarah Chen that spoke of love transcending death itself. I'm prepared to accept responsibility for caring about a little girl who was being psychologically tortured by her adoptive father, he said finally. I'm prepared to accept responsibility for teaching my son that justice matters more than job security. I'm prepared to accept responsibility for believing that love is worth any risk, even when that love threatens powerful people's control over vulnerable children. Martinez opened her briefcase and withdrew a copy of the morning's Hartford Courant, sliding it across the table so both men could see the front page headline, "Wealthy Adoptive Father Accused of Psychological Abuse. DCF Investigates Blackstone." Estate after employee's heroic intervention. Morrison's face went pale as he scanned the article's subheadings. Social worker breaks silence about adoption concerns. Former housekeeper describes pattern of controlling behavior. Child advocates question elite family's treatment of vulnerable daughter. Maria Santos agreed to an interview from Puerto Rico, Martinez explained with satisfaction. She described multiple incidents where Mr. Blackstone destroyed Maya's possessions, isolated her from potential friendships, and used psychological intimidation to maintain absolute control over her emotional development. Mrs. Rodriguez from the adoption agency provided documentation of concerns she raised during the initial placement process that were apparently ignored due to Mr. Blackstone's political connections. Jerome felt hope blooming in his chest like sunrise after the longest night. Does this mean Maya will be protected? DCF is conducting a comprehensive evaluation, Martinez replied. Dr. Patricia Wells interviewed Maya yesterday and found evidence consistent with sophisticated psychological abuse. Maya's testimony about the photograph burning and your family's intervention has been documented and will be part of the official record. Morrison stood abruptly, his carefully constructed case crumbling around him like a house built on shifting foundations. This interview is over. Mr. Williams, you're free to go pending further investigation. What about the charges? Jerome asked. The district attorney's office will review the evidence and determine whether prosecution serves the public interest, Morrison replied, though his tone suggested that prosecuting a working father for helping an abused child might not play well in the media spotlight that Martinez had created. As they left the police station, Jerome felt the weight of 3 days' terror lifting from his shoulders. The parking lot buzzed with activity as television news crews set up equipment for live broadcasts about the developing story. Martinez had transformed their private battle into a public examination of how wealth and privilege could be used to silence compassion and protect abusers. "What happens now?" Jerome asked as they walked toward Martinez's car. "Now we wait for DCF to complete their investigation and for the public to decide whether they believe money should determine how children are treated in Connecticut," Martinez replied. "The story is out there, Jerome. People are reading about Maya's situation and asking themselves what they would have done in your position." Jerome's phone buzzed with a text message that made his heart race with renewed anxiety. The message was from an unknown number, but its content was unmistakably threatening. "This isn't over. You've made a powerful enemy who doesn't forget or forgive. Watch your back and protect your son." He showed the message to Martinez, who photographed it immediately with the practiced efficiency of someone documenting evidence. "Richard's not giving up," she observed. "If anything, the media attention has made him more dangerous. Cornered, powerful people tend to lash out in unpredictable ways. Should I be worried about Marcus? You should be careful. But you should also remember that the whole state is watching this case now. It's much harder to hurt people when journalists are documenting your every move." As they drove toward Jerome's apartment, both of them understood that their victory was incomplete. Maya was under DCF protection and investigation. Marcus was temporarily safe under media scrutiny, and Richard's reputation was being questioned in newspapers across Connecticut. But powerful men had ways of striking back that didn't appear in police reports or social service files. The battle for Maya's heart was evolving into a war for the soul of justice itself, and the outcome would determine whether courage could triumph over privilege in a system designed to protect wealth rather than innocence. Jerome looked at the threatening text message one more time, then deleted it and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He had come too far and sacrificed too much to be intimidated now. Maya needed protection. Marcus needed a father who stood up for what was right, and the world needed proof that ordinary people could challenge extraordinary power when children's lives hung in the balance. The war was far from over, but Jerome Williams was ready to fight it to the end. Richard Blackstone stood in his mahogany-paneled study, staring at the front page of the Hartford Courant with the cold fury of someone watching his carefully constructed world crumble into ruins. The headline mocked him from across his massive desk: "Wealthy adoptive father accused of psychological abuse," accompanied by a photograph of Maya that made her look vulnerable and frightened rather than privileged and grateful. The article was devastating in its thoroughness. Martinez had interviewed former employees who described his controlling behavior, obtained statements from adoption officials who had harbored concerns about his parenting approach, and painted a picture of systematic psychological abuse disguised as proper child rearing. Most damaging was Maya's own testimony, quoted extensively and presented with the moral authority that only a child's innocent voice could provide. Mr. Blackstone, his personal attorney, David Shaw, stood in the study doorway carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone delivering terminal diagnoses. "We need to discuss damage control strategies immediately." Richard gestured for Shaw to enter, though his attention remained fixed on the newspaper article that was transforming his reputation from philanthropic community leader to suspected child abuser. "How bad is this?" "Catastrophic," Shaw replied, without sugarcoating. "The story has been picked up by regional media outlets, shared thousands of times on social media, and sparked conversations about adoption oversight that could lead to legislative changes. DCF has assigned their most experienced investigators to Maya's case, and they're treating this as a high-priority intervention." "What about the criminal charges against Williams?" "The district attorney's office is declining to prosecute. With this media attention, pursuing theft charges against a father who was trying to help an abused child would be political suicide." Shaw opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "But we have bigger problems than Jerome Williams." Richard finally looked away from the newspaper, his silver hair perfectly styled, despite the chaos surrounding him. "What kind of problems?" The State Attorney General's office has opened an investigation into potential adoption fraud and child welfare violations. They're reviewing your adoption process, examining whether your political connections influenced the approval despite red flags that should have prevented placement. The words hit Richard like financial losses cascading through his portfolio. An Attorney General's investigation would have subpoena power, access to sealed records, and the authority to pursue criminal charges if they found evidence of systematic wrongdoing. There were no red flags, Richard said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. My adoption was approved through normal channels. Richard, your donation to Sunrise Adoption Services was 3 times larger than their annual operating budget. Your reference letters came from a federal judge, 2 state senators, and the mayor of Hartford. The social worker who raised concerns about your psychological evaluation was transferred to a different department 1 week after submitting her report. Shaw's litany of compromised ethics painted a picture of systematic corruption that made Richard's adoption of Maya appear less like charity and more like the acquisition of human property through carefully applied financial pressure. What do you recommend? Richard asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be what he wanted to hear. Immediate settlement negotiations with DCF to avoid criminal prosecution. Public apology, acknowledging mistakes in your parenting approach. Voluntary agreement to family therapy and supervised visitation while Maya undergoes psychological evaluation and healing. Absolutely not. Richard's voice carried the finality of boardroom decisions that brooked no argument. I didn't build a $100 million empire by surrendering to extortion from disgruntled employees and sensation-seeking journalists. This isn't extortion, Richard. This is the consequence of systematically abusing a child while believing your wealth would protect you from accountability. The brutal honesty of Shaw's assessment hung in the air like smoke from a financial crash. Richard had always surrounded himself with people who confirmed his decisions rather than challenging his judgment, and hearing direct criticism from his own attorney felt like betrayal. Maya is my daughter, Richard said, his voice hardening with possessive determination. She belongs in my family under my guidance, learning the values that will prepare her for the opportunities I can provide. Mia is a traumatized child who has been systematically isolated from healthy emotional connections, Shaw replied. The psychological evaluation DCF ordered will likely recommend therapeutic intervention and possibly alternative placement if you can't demonstrate genuine commitment to change. Richard moved to the window overlooking his estate's grounds, where gardeners continued their work despite the media vehicles parked beyond the iron gates. The manicured perfection of his property felt like a mockery now. Beautiful surfaces, concealing the rot beneath, wealth unable to purchase the respectability it had always guaranteed. What about fighting back, he asked, discrediting the accusers, challenging the investigation's legitimacy, using our resources to protect our interests? Shaw's reflection appeared in the window glass beside Richard's, and his expression carried the weariness of someone who had spent years enabling powerful men's worst impulses. Richard, I've been your attorney for 15 years. I've helped you navigate hostile takeovers, regulatory challenges, and personal scandals. But this is different. How is it different? Because this time you're wrong. Legally, morally, completely wrong. Maya is a little girl who needed love and got control instead. Jerome Williams is a working father who risked everything to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. The media coverage is accurate, the public outrage is justified, and fighting. This will only make everything worse. Richard turned from the window to face his attorney directly, his eyes carrying the glacial intensity that had intimidated business rivals for decades. Then you're fired. I'll find representation that understands the value of loyalty over moral grandstanding. Richard, please think about what you're... Get out of my house. Now. Shaw gathered his papers with the methodical precision of someone who had expected this outcome while hoping to avoid it. For what it's worth, Richard, you could still fix this. You could choose to be the father Maya needs instead of the father your pride demands. But that would require admitting you were wrong, and I don't think your ego will allow that level of honesty. As Shaw left the study, Richard felt the familiar rush of power that came from cutting ties with people who opposed his will. He had built his empire by making difficult decisions others couldn't make, by pursuing victory when lesser men accepted defeat. Maya was his daughter, purchased through legal adoption and years of financial investment. Jerome Williams was a disgruntled employee whose interference had temporarily disrupted his family's stability. The media attention was a temporary crisis that could be managed through the same strategic thinking that had made him wealthy. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A contact who specialized in problems that required solutions outside normal legal channels. "Morrison, it's Richard Blackstone. I need the kind of help that doesn't appear in court records or newspaper articles." The conversation that followed would determine whether justice or power would triumph in the battle for Maya's future, and whether a little girl's love for her dead mother would survive the war her protectors had declared on her behalf. Richard Blackstone was about to discover that some battles couldn't be won through money and influence, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones who had nothing left to lose. The final confrontation was approaching, and Maya's fate hung in the balance as two different visions of love prepared for their ultimate collision. Maya sat in the passenger seat of Dr. Wells' sedan, watching the Connecticut countryside blur past her window as they drove toward a place she had never imagined she would see. A temporary foster home where she could stay while the courts decided her future. Her small suitcase in the back seat contained clothes, a few books, and most importantly, the photographs and letters from her mother that had started this entire battle. "Are you scared?" Dr. Wells asked gently, glancing at Maya's reflection in the rearview mirror. Maya considered the question carefully. "I'm scared about not seeing Marcus again, and I'm scared that Father will hurt his family because they helped me." "Marcus and his father are under protective monitoring right now," Dr. Wells explained. "The media attention makes it very difficult for anyone to threaten them without consequences, and you'll be able to see Marcus again once we get everything sorted out." The foster home appeared around a bend in the road, a modest two-story house with a wraparound porch and flower gardens that looked like they were tended by people who cared about beauty for its own sake rather than for impressing others. This was Maya's first glimpse of what normal families might look like, and the difference from the Blackstone mansion's marble perfection was striking in its warmth and authenticity. Linda and Robert Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, met. Them at the front door with gentle smiles and the kind of casual clothes that suggested comfort mattered more than appearances. Linda was a retired teacher with silver-streaked hair and laugh lines around her eyes, while Robert worked as a librarian and had the patient demeanor of someone who believed in the power of stories to heal wounded hearts. "Maya," Linda said, kneeling to the little girl's eye level, "we're so glad you're going to stay with us for a while. We've prepared a room just for you, and we want you to know that this is your safe space for as long as you need it." The bedroom they showed her was nothing like her room at the mansion. Instead of marble and crystal, it had wooden furniture painted cheerful colors, bookshelves filled with children's stories, and windows that looked out on a backyard where neighborhood kids were playing soccer. Most importantly, it felt like a space designed for a child's happiness rather than an adult's control. "Can I really put my mother's pictures anywhere I want?" Maya asked, still clutching the photographs that had caused so much trouble. "This is your room," Robert said kindly. "You can arrange it however makes you feel most comfortable and happy." Maya spent the next hour carefully placing her mother's photographs around the room, on the nightstand, the dresser, and most prominently on the small desk by the window. Sarah's gentle face smiled from every angle, creating a constellation of love that surrounded Maya with the warmth she had been denied for too long. Dr. Wells returned that evening to check on Maya's adjustment and found her sitting on her bed. reading one of her mother's letters by lamplight, surrounded by the security of knowing she was protected and valued. "How are you feeling about everything?" Dr. Wells asked, settling into the comfortable chair beside Maya's bed. "Better," Maya said honestly. "But I keep thinking about Marcus and his dad. Are they really safe?" "They're safe. In fact, I have some news that might make you happy. The district attorney decided not to prosecute them for helping you. Jerome Williams is being called a hero in the newspapers, and Marcus is being praised for his courage." Maya smiled, the first completely uninhibited smile Dr. Wells had seen from her. "Can I write them a letter to thank them and tell them I'm okay?" "I think that would be wonderful." Maya pulled out a piece of the stationery Linda had provided and began writing in her careful 7-year-old script. "Dear Marcus and Mr. Williams, thank you for giving me back my mother. Thank you for being brave when I couldn't be brave enough by myself. I'm safe now with nice people who let me keep all of Mama's pictures and letters where I can see them every day. Dr. Wells says you're heroes in the newspapers, and I think that's exactly right. You're my heroes too. I hope I can see you soon. I want to tell you about my new room and maybe show you the letter Mama wrote for when I turn 8 next month. I think she would be proud of all of us for being brave together. Love, Maya." As Maya sealed the letter in an envelope, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her mother's death. The security of knowing she was surrounded by people who valued her happiness over their own convenience, who saw her as a precious child rather than a possession to be controlled. The battle for her heart was ending with love, triumphant over power, truth victorious over manipulation, and courage rewarded rather than punished. Maya Chen Blackstone was finally free to be the little girl her mother had dreamed she would become, surrounded by the love that transcends death and protects innocence from those who would destroy it for their own purposes. In her temporary home, filled with borrowed furniture and genuine warmth, Maya fell asleep clutching her mother's photograph and dreaming of a future where kindness was more powerful than money, where justice protected the vulnerable instead of the wealthy, and where a little girl's love for her dead mother could inspire heroes to risk everything for what was right. The war was over, and love had won. 6 months later, the spring sunshine painted golden streaks across the courthouse steps as Maya Chen walked hand in hand with Linda and Robert Chen toward the family court entrance. At 8 years old now, Maya had grown taller and more confident, her dark hair catching the light as she moved with the assured steps of a child who knew she was loved and protected. The custody hearing that would finalize her placement had drawn media attention from across Connecticut, transforming what should have been a private family matter into a public referendum on wealth, power, and the rights of children to emotional safety. But Maya no longer felt overwhelmed by the cameras and reporters. She understood that her story had become larger than herself, inspiring other children to speak up about abuse and encouraging adults to listen when vulnerable voices demanded justice. Jerome and Marcus Williams waited near the courthouse entrance, both wearing their best clothes and carrying themselves with the quiet dignity of people who had discovered that doing the right thing was its own reward. Jerome had found new employment as head of maintenance at Roosevelt Middle School, where his reputation as someone who protected children had made him beloved by students and respected by faculty. Marcus, now 13 and taller than his father, had become something of a local celebrity among his classmates, though he remained the same thoughtful boy who had risked everything for a little girl's happiness. "Maya!" Marcus called out when he spotted her approaching, his face lighting up with genuine joy. Maya broke away from the Chens and ran toward Marcus, throwing her arms around him in a hug that conveyed months of gratitude and affection. "I missed you so much. Did you read the letter I sent about my birthday party?" 3 times, Marcus laughed. "I can't believe you're 8 now. You seem so much older." "Mrs. Chen says trauma makes children grow up faster, but love helps them remember how to be kids again," Maya replied, with the wisdom of someone who had experienced both sides of that equation. Jerome approached more slowly, his weathered face soft with emotion, as he looked at the little girl whose courage had changed all their lives. "How are you doing, Maya?" "Really doing?" "I'm happy," Maya said simply, and the truth of that statement radiated from every part of her being. "I have my mother's pictures in my room, and I read her letters when I miss her. But I'm not sad all the time anymore. I'm learning that I can love her memory and still have space in my heart for new people who care about me." Dr. Wells emerged from the courthouse with updates about the hearing process. "Maya, the judge wants to speak with you privately before making her final decision. Are you ready?" Maya nodded, though she felt butterflies dancing in her stomach. This conversation would determine whether she could stay permanently with the Chen family or whether some legal technicality might force her back into Richard's custody. Despite all the evidence of his psychological abuse, the family courtroom was smaller and less intimidating than Maya had expected, with warm wood paneling and natural light that made it feel more like a conference room than a place where life-changing decisions were made. Judge Rebecca Santos, no relation to the former housekeeper who had provided crucial testimony, was a woman in her 50s whose kind eyes and patient demeanor suggested she truly cared about the children whose futures passed through her courtroom. "Maya," Judge Santos said gently, "I've read all the reports about your situation and I've listened to testimony from many people who care about you. But I want to hear directly from you about what would make you feel safest and happiest." Maya had been preparing for this moment for months, practicing with Dr. Wells and the Chens how to express her feelings clearly and honestly. "Your Honor, I want to stay with Mr. and Mrs. Chen. They let me keep my mother's memory alive while helping me build new memories too. They don't try to erase who I was before. They help me become who I'm supposed to be." "What about your relationship with Mr. Blackstone?" "He is your legal adoptive father." Maya was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain something so complex without sounding ungrateful or vindictive. "He gave me nice things and good education, but he never gave me what I needed most. He wanted me to be grateful for being saved from my past, instead of helping me understand that my past was part of what made me special." "And what about Marcus Williams and his father? How do you feel about what they did?" Maya's face lit up with a smile that needed no words to explain its meaning. "They showed me that strangers could love me enough to risk everything for my happiness. They proved that my mother's love was still alive in the world through people who cared about protecting it." Judge Santos made notes while Maya spoke, recognizing the emotional maturity that trauma and healing had created in this remarkable child. "Maya, I want you to know that whatever I decide today, it will be based on what's best for your emotional and psychological well-being. You've been through more than any child should have to experience, but you've also shown incredible courage and resilience." "Thank you, Your Honor. Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Will Marcus and his dad be okay? I know Mr. Blackstone is still angry about what happened." Judge Santos's expression grew serious. "Maya, I want you to know that Mr. Blackstone has been ordered to stay away from the Williams family and from you during this process. If he violates those orders, he will face serious legal consequences." The hearing reconvened with all parties present, including Richard Blackstone and his new legal team. Maya was struck by how different her former adoptive father looked, thinner, grayer, with eyes that held the bitter resentment of someone who had lost a battle he believed he should have won. He stared at her with the cold intensity she remembered from his nightly inspections, but Maya no longer felt afraid of his disapproval. Judge Santos reviewed the case files one final time before delivering her decision. In the matter of Maya Chen Blackstone's custody and placement, this court has reviewed extensive evidence regarding the child's emotional well-being and best interests. While Mr. Blackstone provided material advantages and educational opportunities, the evidence clearly demonstrates that his parenting approach caused significant psychological harm to Maya. Richard's jaw tightened with controlled fury, but he remained silent as the judge continued. The court finds that Maya's current placement with Linda and Robert Chen provides the emotional safety, therapeutic support, and respect for her heritage that she requires for healthy development. Furthermore, the court commends Jerome and Marcus Williams for their courage in advocating for Maya's welfare despite personal risks to their own security. Maya felt tears of relief and joy streaming down her cheeks as Judge Santos announced her decision. Therefore, this court grants permanent custody of Maya Chen to Linda and Robert Chen, with the understanding that they will continue to support her relationship with her birth mother's memory and her connections to the Williams family who helped rescue her from an emotionally abusive situation. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration as Maya was officially freed from Richard's control forever. Linda and Robert embraced her with the love of parents who had chosen her happiness over convenience, while Jerome and Marcus watched with the satisfaction of heroes whose courage had created a happy ending. Richard Blackstone left the courtroom. Without speaking, his expensive suit unable to disguise his defeat or restore the reputation that his cruelty had destroyed. He had learned too late that money could not purchase love, that control was no substitute for genuine care, and that children were human beings deserving of respect rather than possessions to be managed. As Maya walked out of the courthouse between her new parents, she carried with her the photographs and letters that had started this entire battle. Her mother's face smiled from the images in her backpack, and Sarah's words of love and wisdom lived in her heart as guidance for whatever challenges the future might bring. The war for Maya's heart was truly over, and love had triumphed completely. 1 year later, Maya Chen stood in the kitchen of her forever home, carefully arranging 9 candles on a birthday cake that Linda had made from scratch using a recipe passed down through 3 generations of her family. The kitchen smelled of vanilla and butter, filled with the warm chaos of a real family celebration rather than the cold perfection of formal occasions. "Are you ready for your party?" Linda asked, wiping flour from her hands with a dish towel that had seen better days but was treasured because Robert had given it to her on their first anniversary. Maya nodded, though her attention was focused on the letter she held in her hands. The one her mother had written for her 9th birthday, to be opened exactly 1 year from today. She had been saving it like a precious gift, knowing that Sarah's words would help her understand how much she had grown and changed since that terrible night when Richard burned her first photograph. "Can I read Mama's letter before everyone gets here?" Maya asked. "Of course, sweetheart. That's a private moment between you and your mother." Maya settled into the window seat that had become her favorite reading spot, overlooking the backyard where neighborhood children were setting up chairs for her party. Marcus would be arriving soon with his father, along with Dr. Wells, Mrs. Rodriguez from the adoption agency, and several other people who had become part of Maya's extended family of choice. The letter was written in Sarah's careful handwriting, and Maya could almost hear her mother's voice speaking the words. "My darling Maya, if you're reading this on your 9th birthday, it means you've survived some of the hardest years of childhood and begun to discover the strength that lives inside you. I hope you've learned that being kind doesn't mean being weak, that standing up for what's right sometimes requires courage you didn't know you possessed, and that love can come from unexpected places when you need it most. I hope you found people who value your heart as much as your achievements, who help you honor your past while building your future, and who understand that a little girl's tears are not weakness, but proof of how deeply she can love. Most importantly, I hope you've learned that you are worthy of protection, deserving of kindness, and entitled to happiness, not because of what you accomplish, but because of who you are. My daughter, carrying my love into a world that needs more people like you. Happy birthday, my brave girl. Make choices that make your heart proud. And remember that I am always with you in every act of courage, every moment of compassion, and every time you choose love over fear. All my love forever." Mama Maya wiped tears from her cheeks, but they were tears of healing rather than grief. She understood now that her mother's death had not ended their relationship. It had transformed it into something that could never be taken away by cruel adults or destroyed by those who mistook control for love. The sound of car doors slamming announced the arrival of her guests, and Maya carefully folded the letter before running to greet the people who had become her chosen family. Marcus emerged from his father's truck carrying a wrapped present and wearing the shy smile of a teenager who was still getting used to being called a hero in newspaper articles. "Happy birthday, Maya," he called out, and she threw her arms around him with the enthusiasm of someone who understood that some friendships were worth any risk to protect. Jerome followed more slowly, carrying a bouquet of flowers from their small garden and wearing the contentment of a man who had discovered that doing the right thing was its own reward. 9 years old, he marveled. Pretty soon you'll be too grown up to hug old janitors. Never, Maya declared fiercely. You're not just a janitor, you're my hero. The party that followed was everything a child's birthday celebration should be: noisy, chaotic, filled with laughter and love, rather than formal expectations and performance anxiety. Maya blew out her candles while surrounded by people who valued her happiness over their own convenience, who had fought for her right to be loved rather than simply provided for. As the sun set over their modest neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Maya of hope and new beginnings, she sat on the porch swing between Linda and Robert, while Marcus and Jerome helped clean up the party decorations. "Are you happy?" Linda asked gently, the same question Dr. Wells had posed so many months ago in a courthouse filled with uncertainty. "I'm happy," Maya replied, and the truth of that statement filled the evening air with the power of love triumphant over cruelty, justice victorious over privilege, and courage rewarded with the only prize that truly mattered, the right of a little girl to be cherished for who she was, rather than controlled for what she might become. In her pocket, Sarah's birthday letter crinkled softly as Maya moved, reminding her that some love transcends death. Some bonds cannot be broken by those who mistake power for strength, and some battles are worth fighting because they protect what matters most: the right of every child to be loved completely, defended fiercely, and treasured absolutely. Maya Chen was finally home, surrounded by the family she had chosen and the love that had chosen her, carrying her mother's memory into a future bright with possibility, and protected by people who understood that a little girl's happiness was worth any sacrifice. The war for her heart was over, and love had won forever.